Alrighty, so today we're going to be doing a competitive and ranked tier list. So whenever we do this, it's taking into account some inspiration from SPL, but that's not just for SPL-wise because, I mean, not a lot of people want to know SPL. Also, we don't want to give away our complete thoughts on SPL because, you know, we're obviously competitive players at the end of the day, and our first priority is winning games. But it's also going to be about ranked. So what you should be playing in ranked in order to win right now in this current meta. And we're going to take into account a little bit of the future because there's going to be some changes coming up soon. And we want to kind of, you know, make sure that we're not just making a tier list for the next 5 days or whatever. So we're trying to make this pretty a general tier list. We're going to talk about every god in the game in every role and, you know, value things based on flex picks, value things based on how hard they're carrying in ranked right now, and all that good stuff. And when I say we, I'm talking about me and Maxime Yanovich, Panda Cat. So say hi, Max.
Hi, Max.
Oh, you're so funny. You're hilarious, dude. All right, you ready to get started? You just want to jump right in so we don't take 3 hours like we did last time?
Yeah, let's leap on in. Also, okay, I'm not on push talk right now, so if there's any, like, you know, angry Russian yelling in the background, you know.
That's fine. As long as you don't play World of Warcraft while we interview you.
I mean, I probably can. It's fucking gonna put me to sleep.
Oh, okay. All right, well, we'll just go ahead and get started. We're going to try and talk a little bit about every god, but maybe not too much, just so you guys don't have to watch for 6 hours. Although maybe you would enjoy that. I don't know. But yeah, we're going to try and make it the most informative tier list on YouTube once again, because the last one we did, I mean, it was information jam-packed, wasn't it? I would say so. Anyway, all right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off, well, with Achilles, because we're going to go through alphabetical order. So first and foremost, Mr.
Hello,
Achilles.
Fine and YouTube.
Thanks for the 100 bits, Jiren. I appreciate it. Okay, Achilles. I kind of don't think Achilles is that great, but the thing about Achilles is that he's a flex pick,
my guy.
And he can be played support, jungle, and solo. And for that reason, I think he's maybe a little bit higher. I'd probably put him in B tier. That's where I would have him. Just a pretty bad early clear, and I don't know. His execute is pretty easy to play around in my opinion, and he doesn't really have enough damage right now in late game fights to actually kill people in my opinion.
This sort of like, you like pass me the mic?
Yeah, basically, Max.
Yeah, I don't know where. Like, it's kind of hard to put the first couple gods in a tier because it's all like relative to where the other gods can go. But I don't think Achilles is necessarily great. He's pretty easy to live against. He's got a lot of telegraphed abilities, such as his ult. You can kind of know when he's going to use everything that he's going to use. And yeah, I think he's just like pretty easy to play around and against.
Agreed. Agni, I would say pretty similar to Achilles. I mean, he's not the worst guy in the game, but he's not very good, especially in this meta with a lot of thorns. Let me actually put one more tier. I'm going to put an A+ tier, and then we'll have everything else. A+, and we'll make that, and it could be the same color. Yeah, that's fine color. Yeah, we'll have A+. I'll put Agni in, no, I'll have him in B. I honestly think he's pretty bad right now because of thorns. He's a horrible god into thorns because whenever you dash, you don't have a choice in whether or not you reflect the damage. And he also is just another one of those characters that it's pretty hard to get all your damage off and secure it all, and it you know, like I said, I just feel like he's very, very easy to dive. Even though he does have a dash that makes him pretty safe, it's really easy to just chase him down and kill him with your thorns. So,
yeah, I agree. I think a lot of what Agni's good at is dealing damage because he doesn't really offer much else. And in a thorns meta, you kind of just like blow yourself up, and a lot of the damage you can't even like take back or cancel. Right, like when you cast a bomb or use your 3, it's kind of just there for a good thornser to step into and kill you with. So
yeah. His ult is really slow as well, in my opinion. It's hard to get all of your bombs off. But AMC, I don't really have too much of an opinion on AMC. I would say there's no way he's better than like Agni and Achilles just because he's hard to pick in a lot of scenarios. But I would say he's probably around the same because his payoff is probably a little bit higher. What would you think? I think it's more on you.
Yeah, probably around B-ish. I don't know if, like you said, I don't know if he's necessarily higher because he is just like such a niche pick. There's not really like a scenario you can really like wish for where you wouldn't just want to pick another character. But I mean, if he gets to like mid late game, he's pretty good with Silver Branch. He's got like, you know, a lot of power. He's definitely does have a pretty nice payoff. So I probably around B tier, but he's just not that
Father.
great. Low mobility, hard to draft around and pick well in like
Right.
good spots. So
This next one's really easy. Alposh is in D tier, even though you would think,
F
because
tier.
there's a lot more healers now in the meta.
Subbing to you is overrated, but I'll make an exception today. Pepe laugh.
Even though there's a lot of healers in the meta, he's still pretty horrible. Very, very easy to dive and kill. Even though, like, once upon a time, he had so much damage that he could kill people diving him. The only reason that was a thing was because Spear of the Magus and Soul Reaver were really, really broken at the time. So he just had 4 damaging abilities that proc those items really well. But now that those aren't completely broken, he cannot do enough damage to kill people. Very easy to dive, very easy to play around. Just gets really no value and not really worth picking him, even though healers are meta. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. That god is not good.
Yeah, I think he's just the worst god in the game.
Yeah.
If you pick him, you're trolling.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, he probably is.
Although in other game modes he's pretty good just because he has so much AoE and he can like block off like assault lane and stuff. But that's not what this is about. Anyway, Anhur, I would say Anhur is probably A plus. He recently got buffed. His jump's a little bit faster now after 7 years of being pretty much the same god. They really never really changed much about him. His jump is a little bit different now mechanically, and I would say it makes him a decent bit better. But at the end of the day, he's probably just still around that A tier, just a pretty well balanced god. Let's add one more tier as well. I'm just adding tiers as we go. I'm gonna add S plus. That's for like the really broken gods.
Like Artemis.
Yeah, exactly. We'll make that black. Yeah, I would say Anhur's A, pretty balanced. I would say A tier is where we're gonna put all the most balanced gods, and you could maybe say A plus just because I think you can pick them in a lot of scenarios and feel fine. But I don't know. I think probably just A, right?
Yeah, I think he's got the same issues he's had before with like being really easy to dive just because he's only got like a pretty generic escape, and if you get on him early before he's like popping off with his ult and everything, he will just die like most other hunters will. But I think his buff is nice, so that's pretty cool. He becomes a lot easier to play, a lot less things interrupt it. Yeah, he's probably one of the more balanced hunters, kind of like the Agni is of mages. Anhur is just like a pretty standard decent pick that can do well and can also be terrible and make you want to never play the game again. So
yeah, Cupid is pretty meta right now, so he's always good into Cupid. It's a good counter matchup, but it's not really like, I don't know, it's not really going to be making him any better than just balance in my opinion. Amma got a few nerfs lately. She was in a really broken spot, probably around S tier before, but she's also gotten nerfed quite a bit, and her ult is now on a 95-second cooldown at rank 1, which is a really big deal, in my opinion. It kind of allows you to punish her really hard, and, I mean, honestly, that combined with the other nerfs that she has brings her value down a little bit. I would say she's still a pretty good god, though. I'd probably put her in A+. Still something that you can pick and feel good about, especially because she still has the strengths of like being good at objectives and also being a really good diver in the late game, but I would say probably A+ after the nerfs.
Yeah, I haven't really played against too much nerfed Amma. I'd say she's probably A plus. Maybe if you did another tier, she'd be like S minus or something like that.
Yeah, perhaps.
I mean, she just does like a lot of damage. Is a big team fighter. Her one's really good for objectives and bursting, and also for like escorting people. What the fuck? Excuse me. I'm really choking. Escorting people like in and out of fights. Her ability to solo carries is pretty much like some of the highest out of your lane in general. And if that god gets to like mid late game, she is kind of just like really hard to deal with.
Yeah.
But she's probably worse though after her nerfs, obviously.
Yeah. She's still got a good build. That's the only thing I think that maybe would make her really good is that Berserker's Frostbound on her is pretty nice, plus Shogun's good around objectives. I would say, coming up next, Anubis, I would say he's actually probably A tier. I think his payoff is, like, you can't pick him in more scenarios than you would pick, like, Achilles or Agni or even AMC, but his payoff, I think, is a little bit higher. He's really good at bursting objectives, and he's also very, very good at just killing frontliners. He just does so much damage. Thorns is pretty good against him, but I would say that he's viable, honestly, in ranked at least. He's viable in solo and in mid. So I would definitely put him around A. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think Anubis is also in one of those tricky spots with Thorns just being super good and like a lot of people building it, because a lot of what Anubis wants to do is like just sustain damage and like blow up a tank with his wrap combo. But if they have Thorns, a lot of that damage will be reflected back onto him, and it makes him kind of tricky to like pick and draft with. But I think when I played mid, I used to love this character. Thought he was pretty dang good. It's just he's in the same position AMC's, and it's just like, when are you going to pick him, and why are you picking him over another god. So
Yeah.
I'd probably if you had an A-, I'd probably put him in A-. But A's probably right around where he belongs.
Pretty balanced, I think. His payoff is there, but he's also pretty easy to punish. But he's also really good because of purple boots. Ever since they changed purple boots, it's been really good for Anubis. Kuang, I'm probably putting C. They buffed that god recently, and he was kind of dominating rank for a little bit, but honestly, if you just don't die to an Kuang gank in the first 3 minutes of the game, the character is very, very easy to deal with in team fights and very easy to punish. Anti-heal is really good against him because he kind of relies on like that double lifesteal build. And a lot of characters are good against him, plus Crusher. You can never get his one off if you just always have Crusher on him, or always are like, I don't know, Susanoo, Tsukiyomi, even the auto attack characters are good against him. So Nemesis, for example. So Arendite's also very, very good against him. So he can just basically never use his one, which is really bad for him because he's pretty easy to go on. So I just think the character is kind of bad.
Yeah, I think with the addition of Arendite, it kind of just killed all the stealth characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I was like, kind of like, oh, at least you can like stealth and be sneaky, but in team fights, that's not even possible anymore. On top of that, like Heim's getting picked a good bit. He's kind of the counter to stealth characters as well. There's one in passive. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he has a great build path right now either. I think he can't really kill tanks that have thorns because he can't lifesteal through them. He doesn't have as much like burst as you'd want from a jungler. His ganks are pretty weak. He's just an overall weak character.
Yeah, and his 3 is probably one of the worst abilities in the game, to be honest. His 3 is like so horrible.
Say horrible.
Say horrible. Afro's kind of weird because I think if like you're just talking about in general.
Afro?
Yeah, in general, the god isn't amazing because she requires some communication and some like teamwork. But like obviously, if you're talking about like Darda's Afro, it's going to be really, really high. But I think in general, the character is probably around A tier, pretty balanced now after her nerfs. And does require like some form of like organization and communication with the team for her to really pop off, because honestly upgraded Kursonk and like super hard dive comps are really good against her. She's still really easy to kill in like a ranked scenario when you have that upgraded Kursonk, but in the scenarios where she is like communicating with her team and really organized, she is a pretty decent character. So I'd probably put her around A, maybe A plus, just because in ranked healing can be a little bit ridiculous. So I'll put her in A plus.
Yeah, I was gonna say she probably is a little higher than A. I mean, it really depends on, like you said, the team and the player piloting the Afro. Because like one player can make it look like a C tier character, but then you have got players like Dardas who get that character banned away from him consistently and just like do a lot of work on the character.
Yeah.
I think she's just really annoying because she kind of just links to a jungler and then the jungler just pops on you and you can't really do anything about it. And once this character starts like roaming with her team and looking for picks and whatnot, she becomes quite a bit of a nuisance.
Yeah.
So also she's kind of unaffected by thorns, which is a big deal right now.
That is true.
Because thorns
she's also really good with Doom
meta.
Orb, especially in that scenario where she's roaming around with her team. Clear a wave, walk into the jungle with that extra movement speed MP5, and you can kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah, for sure.
Apollo, I actually don't really know about Apollo. He got buffed recently as well, but I would still say he's probably lower payoff than something like Anhur. Definitely less balance as well, because I think his ult is pretty bad. The only reason you would want an Apollo on your team is maybe to split push, and he also, I think, loses a lot of 1v1 matchups in the lane itself, so I would say he's probably around B tier. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, the dash change was cool and all. They gave him the same treatment as Anhur with, like, the sped up dash. But I just don't think it does enough for the character. I think this character's kind of outdated. His one doesn't really do much. His ult takes like straight up 2 business days to get up off the ground. I can go make a coffee by the time that thing starts going up in the air. Half the time you just get killed. Yeah. So effectively you're playing a character with 3 abilities in team fights that doesn't really do much like exceedingly well.
Yeah.
So,
that's actually a pretty common theme across hunters is that like the characters that actually have like a good ultimate in a team fight are usually more valuable, especially right now. Because a character like Apollo, he'll walk into a team fight, like you said, and just basically have 3 abilities. And then, like, why would you play that character over somebody like Hachiman, Rama, who can maybe hit 3 or 4 people with their ults, or maybe Rama, who can just like solo somebody with his ultimate? Like you're basically, it's pretty straightforward. Why would you pick that character when you can have a character who basically has an extra ability? So, Arachne up next, since this is across ranked as well. Arachne is a menace in rank and still hard carry and get those early ganks off and carry. So I'd probably put her in A. just because it's also considering ranked. If this was just SPL, then we might lower a little bit, just because, in an organized game, she's a little easier to play around, especially with upgraded shell being a thing that hard farms her, because her 2 and her 1 are literally abilities that she needs to auto attack with to do anything. So I would say she's probably around A. Pretty straightforward. Good in ranked, not that great in competitive.
Yeah, she is just a rank farmer. I think Sino the only player to play her. What's it called in the SPL?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember if he won or lost that game, but she just kind of hard farms ranked because she has some cheesy starts that you could do, where you can like web a camp and then you don't actually need to go to that camp, so you can get like early ganks and do N1 and mid and stuff like that. And it's more of like a surprise factor to the people who don't know it's coming, and it'll guarantee like some early kills for the most part.
Yeah.
But in slowed down like competitive play, she's just not good in my opinion.
Yeah,
unless you really have a strat that's like foolproof. But
yeah, and even in those scenarios where she gets those early ganks in competitive, if you just like stall till late game with upgraded shell, like she's gonna fall off really hard, and the fall off is like worth enough where like you would be okay with dying early sometimes, Yeah. Ares up next. He's another character that got a buff. He has HP 5 on his 2 now. He's always more of a counter pick than it's never going to be a character that you're just like, yep, A+ tier, pick him and like always feel good about it, just because he has 2 really long channeled abilities in his chains and his 3. So he's always going to be able to get counterpicked, which is kind of always been the problem with him. But it's also why he's more of a balanced character. He's just a counter pick. He's cripple is really good against a lot of like meta picks like Arthur. He's good against characters with no CC immunity, which is, there's some characters like that played right now in the mid lane. But I would say he's more of a counter pick, which makes him a B tier, even with his buffs. So
yeah, I think if you have Ares into like the ideal comp Ares wants to be against, he feels like pretty oppressive to play against, because like his chains will just solo you and stuff like that. And if you don't have CC immune ultimates, you're just constantly at threat.
Yeah.
But he is immobile. He's got, kind of just this hard time like doing a lot of damage in team defense and whatnot, because you can kind of just get blown up while you're charging your own and whatnot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. He's just kind of a niche pick, kind of like the other characters in this tier, that you just don't really ever have a reason to pick him. And if there is a reason to pick him, there's probably a reason to pick a character that's just better than him.
Yeah, pretty much. Artemis, your freaking favorite.
Oh, yeah, dude.
I would say she's C tier because she got the buff recently to her 2, which gives her slow immunity, which gives her a little bit more playability, like in certain counter matchups where like maybe it can, I don't know, maybe against like Cupid, you can use the 2 to get out of Cupidol. Maybe you can use it to like 2 away from an Anhur pillar or something like that. I'm not really sure, so I think that maybe makes her a little bit more valuable, but I would say Opwash is a little worse than this character just because of that recent buff. What do you think?
Maybe. I kind of think they're both D tier, because like sure like her matchups into some characters are a little bit better with her movement speed change, whatever, the slow immunity change.
Yeah.
But then you run into the same issues that have been, prevalent with her for the past like 4 years, where the second the jungler decides that he wants you dead, you are just dead, and there's no stopping that.
That is true.
And
Suki only probably farmed her too.
She would probably just be getting farmed by thorns, because like
the
board is actually a good bit of damage, and she has no escape, so she can't just stop hitting somebody. Like she can like stand there and walk around and not auto attack, but she would be pretty damn useless in this meta if she was even playable.
That's true. A character that kind of has to stand her ground is a lot worse than Thorns meta.
Exactly. So. Somebody like Rama, you go on him, he goes up. Somebody like Artemis, you go on her, and what does she do? She either stays at you and dies to your thorns, or does 0. So,
yep, that's true. That's a good point. Artio, kind of just a balanced god, I think, probably around A. Pretty easy to like just focus down and just kill, because she has no CC immunity. She gets hard owned by like cripples, even though she has a cripple herself. She gets hard owned by like any CC really, and is more of a counter pick, I would say. But she does have the benefit of being pretty high pressure early on and can get you some kills in lane. But I don't know, the payoff isn't always there, so I'd probably put her in A, just a pretty balanced support. She can be played in solo, but I don't really think it's really that worth it, because come late game, you're not really gonna be very useful on anybody.
Yeah, I think there's a couple like good Artio players in the league. Besides that, she doesn't really see much play, and it's probably for a good reason. Like she's just not like that threatening. She used to be at one point, but I think she went through a series of nerfs and stuff like that. I think not having CC immunity is kind of a big like issue in this meta. There's just like a million CCs. They're picked on most teams.
Mm-hmm.
So you have CC immunity and you get into a fight, you get stunned and then sundered in one shot, which happens a lot more than people probably notice. You're just not going to be useful. Also, she takes quite a while to get like all her damage off. Like you have 2 kits, so she has to go through a druid stance, go into bear stance, do that and whatnot. But I don't know. I don't think she's great to the meta picks. She kind of gets blown up by CC. She's an okay Thornser, but it takes her a while to get our damage off, and she's just like very mediocre. So.
Mm-hmm. Athena, honestly, I think Athena's more B tier. Her biggest strength is her taunt, and maybe her ultimate. In organized play, her ultimate's really strong. In ranked, it's probably not that strong, not a big deal. But at the end of the day, she's another character that's very easy to play around. Like kind of affected by power creep. Come late game, she's pretty easy to play around. She's very easy to burst if she ever dashes in. And just kind of lose a lot of value. It's hard to justify picking a character like her in ranked, especially when you can just pick a character that can win you the early game, can W key really hard, and does a whole lot with like thorns and stuff. And she doesn't really do as much. So
yeah, I think Athena's pretty one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there's like 2 ways you can play the character, but for the most part, it's all the same. And she's been around for far too long for people to like not understand how to properly play around the character. You just go in off the taunt. Like the second she goes in, she taunts. She's effectively useless in the team fights. You just go on their backline or just kill her. And the ult for the most part is pretty easy to play around as well. It can be pretty annoying if you're trying to run like crazy pressure in a lane and you just have the threat of her being able to ult on top of you. But besides that, I mean, she's just very easy to play around, and I feel like a lot of people have like perfected playing around Athena's.
Mm-hmm. Basically, just kill her when she goes in.
Yeah.
Willick's probably pretty balanced character. I think she's A. Obviously, there's some players that will really pop off with her, and the build path has been good for her for a long time. Erendite's really good on her. Crusher, Heartseeker, all that stuff makes her late game pretty good. She can kind of just one-shot people off of her blink. But at the end of the day, she does have a relatively high skill cap, and she's not as just like straightforward to play as some of the other junglers that you'll see in ranked. So I would say that she's good in a lot of counter picks as well. But you're not just going to top pick her and be like, oh, this is amazing just because, cripples and stuff are going to own you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, some players, I'm not going to name any names because, I don't want to toot his horn too much or else he's going to have a big ego. Obviously can work extremely well with that character, but I don't know. I think, as a diver, it's always so easy to play around her. The only time she'll really, kill you is if she gets behind you on her blink.
Yeah.
And then instant knocks you up, and then you're kind of useless for a little bit. Besides that, she doesn't have CC immunity, and a lot of the hunters right now can just cripple or kill her. Cupid, for example, kind of just cripples her, and then she can't do anything. Top of that, upgraded shell really, really farms her because she can't auto off you, and then that means she can't proc her too. So
and that's her main form of damage.
Can't really do anything. So she'll blink on you, she'll through you. If you're not knocked up right away, then you can get a shell on yourself, or your support can shell you, whoever has a shell, and then she kind of just stands there hitting into block stacks, wishing she wasn't a Wheelix. But character has a lot of good early game presence. She obviously has extremely high damage numbers and can do a lot of work with her ability to rotate around the map very quickly and efficiently. So if you utilize that, you'll be in a good spot. But come late game, she is very easy to deal with, in my opinion.
Yeah. Baba Yaga. Thinking around B tier. The character is still a little clunky. Once they make her ult not as clunky, I think the character will be a little bit better, but early game isn't that strong. Her late game is actually pretty strong, but it's hard to get there a lot of the time. And some of her stuff is easy to play around, like her 3, for example. There's a bit of a channel time on it. Sometimes it's pretty easy to interrupt, and that's her main escape. And then she's pretty easy to just gun down in her ultimate and kill. But come late game, her ult will do a lot of damage, and her double pots will do a lot of damage. And if you get a random silence with your 1 in a team fight, it can do a lot of work. But there's some RNG and all of that. And I would just say right now, with her clunkiness and her bad early game, she's kind of just a B tier character.
Yeah, I wish I played against and as Baba Yaga more, because she's been buffed 25 times now since her release, or buff, altered, quality of life changes, whatever. And I genuinely don't know how she's still not just broken, and she hasn't been nerfed since.
Yeah. That's the thing. Her late game is crazy.
Yeah, well, it's also it's what's the saying here? Double-edged sword. Because like when you drop the ults, right? When you start throwing the potions from the house, if a tank has thorns and eats that, dude, that ult does like 4,000 damage or something, like something stupid like that. It literally kills carries, and like if you drop it on a carry like 2 or 3 potions and they run in the same direction, like that circle is like flowing, she just insta gives you, man. I've literally taken like 3,000 damage from Baba Yaga in team fight, and it's like what the hell. I'd say she is extremely clunky, and I don't know how they're gonna like fix it or how they're gonna change that. Her potion play is really clunky as well, like pulling them out and whatnot. She has like long animations, throwing them is kind of tedious and whatnot. And there's so much going on with her one between like the different forms of like CC and then the different shapes.
It's all random too, so
inconsistent. Yeah, there's no way of knowing like, yo guys, I'm gonna get like a really big one here. Well, you'll know if it's like right before the team fight, but if you use your one, and then you're not gonna know which one the next one is, and it could be like just not the right shape or whatever, not the right CC and things like that. So yeah, I think she's probably B. She's definitely better than Kuang.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy to think about, but yeah, that's
a good point about her ult is that, you know, once you throw it out, there's no taking it back, kind of like a Nux 2 or an Agni dash. So if anybody has thorns and just walks into it, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I guess I will just take a bunch of damage. I didn't really have a choice in that. Bacchus, I don't know, man, kind of weird.
That buff's gonna kind of break him.
Yeah, the buffs are going to be pretty good, and we're kind of taking that into account with this tier list. So I'd probably put him around A. I think he's pretty balanced. I think his payoff is a little bit better than some of these other characters. He's also pretty decent into some of the meta picks like Kibo and just characters. You know, he's a diving character, and diving is kind of the meta right now. So I would say for that reason, he's probably around A, just kind of like a balanced character. But he's another one of those characters you're not just going to pick in every game. You're going to wait to maybe counter pick, or maybe see like, oh, they have a carry that I can get on pretty easily. Maybe they have like, I don't know, like an Anhur that I can dive pretty easily with a knock-up immunity and stuff like that. So Bacchus I would probably put around A. Pretty balanced in my opinion. And he's going to be a lot better probably with the buff, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think Bacchus is just the ultimate like carry soloer, where he just like, if he gets on you and gets his full kit of damage out on you, you will just feel really bad. And he probably can just solo you. He does have some obvious issues. He's not the best early game character. Like he has to commit his engage or his escape to engage a lot of the time, and like you can kind of aegis his ultimate just because you kind of know when that's coming out. And I don't know, he's just like, dude, there are so many characters that I feel like if I was in that role, I would just play him and farm, but I guess there's just noobs in those roles like Mike who just don't know how to play him or something. So
yeah.
No, I think Bacchus is probably A, maybe like high B. If there's like a B plus, I'd probably put him B plus.
Yeah, probably.
It's kind of niche. You're not gonna like first pick him, but I am interested to see what his change will do, because I think that it's just like random magical power you get from your one, right? It's just gonna make his like all in on a carry even stronger. So
yeah, probably. People are saying Achilles below Bacchus, which is kind of true. I think maybe a little bit biased because I think Achilles isn't as valuable in like the SPL, but I would say in most, like in ranked and stuff, he's probably around A. So I'll move him up to A just with a little bit of extra consideration. Bacca, block stacks own him. Obviously upgraded shell for that reason, owns him pretty hard.
Definitely a cutie pie.
But he still owns in ranked, and he can still get those early kills in snowball and just kind of hyper farm the jungle. So I would say for that reason, he's probably around B, maybe A tier still, despite all that. If this is SPL, obviously he's like D tier. I think the character is horrible there, but I would say just because, you know, ranked and stuff, probably around B. If there's a B plus, I'd probably put him there. So I'll put him in A for now.
Really, I think Bacca's probably B tier. I mean, he went through like, they like target. No, B. Probably like.
Oh, yeah.
Because when they nerfed all the movement speed items and the katanas and whatnot, they like target nerfed Bacca and his kit.
He also got nerfed.
Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So like he was shining for a little bit because his kit was like pretty okay, and then the builds for him was great, and then they nerfed both the build and the character and upgraded shell farms him. And I just feel like he's marginally worse than when we saw him at like his highest point, I guess, in like this recent, what was it, like a month or two ago?
Yeah.
I think he's B. I think Shell, like he's just an auto attacker who has nothing else to offer, no CC or anything, and you have an active in the game that literally just counters exactly what an auto attacker wants to do. So
exactly.
I think
he's also not very good into some of the meta junglers. Like he's not going to outtrade a Nemesis, and Nemesis kind of does everything he does but better. She has no CC, but she just does more damage, is harder to kill, is more annoying for a backliner. So kind of just no reason to pick her over a character like that. One sec. Thanks for all the subs, by the way, guys. I'm gonna thank them at the end. I appreciate all the resubs and all that. Just trying to grind through this video, you know. Baron is up next. Baron, I think, is probably around B tier. Kind of just a counter pick. Does have a pretty high payoff in those counter picks, but did get a recent buff that maybe buffs him a little bit in the middle lane. But for the most part, I think the character is just kind of a counter pick. He's not something that you're gonna ever be like, yeah, give me Baron every game and I'll be doing a lot, because there are just characters that will completely make your ult useless, that have like CC immunity, and maybe you will never even be able to get it off because of their escapes and beads and stuff like that. So got to pick them in the right scenarios for the payoff.
Yeah, I think Baron's Brew is just so nice to have, right, as a team.
That's a good point.
So he is just like valuable somehow, even if his kit's not great. Having that pot is actually extremely valuable. We did win with him today. Captain Twig, aka Ben, did pilot the Baron and have a bunch of crazy plays that I think we're all happy seeing. Yeah, I don't know. I think people can make the god work. Doesn't make the god
making a tier list. Cutie pie making
doesn't
a
make the
tier
god
list.
good. So
Cutie
it doesn't
pie
make him
making a
like
tier
high like
list.
tier list.
Cutie
Like,
pie
I like to
making a
make
tier list.
Alpong work
Cutie
randomly.
pie
It doesn't
making a
make
tier
Alpong an A
list.
tier god or anything. But I think Baron still has obvious flaws in not having any mobility, and if you miss your 2, you're kind of just like, well, there's a big part of my kit down. So yeah, I think he's probably B tier. If there was a B plus, he'd maybe be B plus. But
Yeah.
kind of right.
Yeah, people are saying, you know, I literally picked him in one SPL game with him in mid, but you got to keep in mind that this is ranked, and that's an organized game when everybody is playing around the Baron. And it was also a counter pick and a bunch of other factors, and that's kind of what B tier is. It's a counter pick god that can be good. So just because you win an SPL game with it doesn't mean that the character. I won a game with Artemis solo. That doesn't mean the character's good. You know. Like, anyway, moving on. Bastet. This character is horrible, man. I can't believe they reworked the character. You know, obviously Scream is a very, very good Bastet player, and he can make the character work. But for the most part, across ranked and everything like that, her early game is bad. She's basically just an ult bot now, and her late game is good just because she does have that one-shot potential with her ult, and her jump can literally does like 900 damage with like a full power pen build. But for the most part, the character is just bad now. I hate the rework. I wish they never changed her.
Yeah, I mean, dude, she does 1,000,000 damage to carries with her ulti and up. Like, if you can confirm all your damage on a backliner in a team fight, you will probably just solo him. I mean, not probably, you'll definitely solo him. The issue is the damage is kind of spaced, and if you Aegis the jump, she doesn't really have much else with it. I think the ult kit was better because it had more like unique play making ability with like the cats and body blocking and whatnot and objectives and backdooring. Now she's kind of just a huge like bomb of damage that like just needs to, you know, one shot a carry, and if she doesn't, she's kind of useless. So I don't know. I think she's just like an character. That's
I like her old 3 so much more than her current 3. Her current 3, you can't even. It's really hard to whip. Like, no pun intended because of her 2, but it's really hard to like. I guess I should say flick. It's really hard to flick. The old 3 just felt like so satisfying to hit, and it felt good. And the new 3 is so wonky and weird. It still feels clunky after all this time for whatever reason. And yeah, I agree with you. I feel like she has much less like outplay potential and like cool, unique things that she can do. She's kind of just an ult bot, like I said, and just does damage. So
yeah, I feel like characters that just don't have like something unique to offer, whether it's like CC or, well, pretty much just CC in any way, shape, or form, stuns, cripples, roots, then they're gonna be like worse than the other characters that have CC, especially when a lot of it is pretty telegraphed and it's a dot. Like her 2 is a dot that can be healed through right now with a lot of like healing picks being picked. And her, like, I don't know, her whole kit's just kind of like aegisable. Well, not her whole kit, but most of her kit's aegisable. She's easy to play around, and she's kind of just like a huge damage bot that doesn't do anything else but damage. And I don't think those characters are valuable.
Yep. Bologna, in my opinion, is like C tier. I think the character is really, really bad. It's funny because the character when she was released was absolutely ridiculous, but in honesty, today she's kind of gotten power creeped. I think that her cooldowns are way too long. Her 3 is on like a 20-second cooldown with no point. If you have 1 point in your 3, it has a 20-second cooldown, which is just horrible. Her 2 is, if you look at like Tsukiyomi 2 compared to Bologna 2 these days, it is just ridiculous how much worse it is. Like, So that's why I say she's kind of been power creeped. Her ult is pretty easy to play around, and honestly, is only really good around objectives. Like, it's not very good. It's not that good for diving, at least in my opinion. And she does have the benefit where she can dive carries with her block stacks and stuff like that. But wouldn't you, if you're blocking autos, wouldn't you want a character that doesn't block autos because you have thorns? You kind of want to reflect that damage instead of just absorbing it. It's kind of like counterintuitive sometimes. And yeah, at the end of the day, I think she's been power creeped really hard. She almost loses every solo lane matchup, to be honest, or at least doesn't win it, which is a bad thing for her because her late game isn't really that great. So I don't know. I don't know what you think, Max, but even though people think that she counters ADCs and carries, she's actually pretty easy to play around, in my opinion.
I think the only time I've been countered by that character was the one time you played her in that ranked game where you built hide plus upgraded shell. You had your one. I think you had another upgraded shell on your support, and you would like disarm me, pop your shell, then go into your one, gain blocks like autos. You had like, I think you had like, I did the math when I was on stream, and I was like, dude, I literally have like 8 seconds of not dealing damage between the two of these people hitting me. And that was the only time I was like, damn, that feels pretty good. But besides that, her entire kit is just a Tsukiyomi 2 that's like not even as good as it. And it's kind of troll because I think she could have actually been good in ADC, but then they changed out Atlantis bow, and her build path kind of went weird. And I just think she's like just been nerfed too many times and just not in the meta to even be put above C. So C is where she will belong, she belongs.
Bracken, kind of a flex pick. I think he can be played support, jungle, and solo. And he's also good into a decent amount of meta picks, characters that can't get out of his ultimate, like Rama Cupid for ADC, characters like Kibo in mid or in jungle that he can block and kind of just own. And for that reason, I think he's probably around A, just because he's got that flex pick potential and very good into a lot of meta picks. But at the end of the day, he's another one of those characters that gets owned by upgraded shell because he kind of relies on his one to initiate and get a lot of damage off. And obviously has no CC immunity, so kind of easy to lock down and just own by like an ADC plus a support or maybe a mid laner. So I'd say pretty balanced character, and honestly pretty good counter pick and has a really good payoff in those scenarios.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with pretty much everything you said. If he would be better if he had like a form of CC immunity, but actually he'd be way better if they upgraded or not upgraded, buffed the time it take for his ult to deploy and for the damage to hit. Because right now, like a lot of characters that are in the meta have like pretty quick dashes and jumps and whatnot, and you can almost always react off of a blink. So if he like blinks, you can instantly dash backwards or jump away, and he won't even confirm that ult damage on you, which is actually like probably like half of his kit's damage between his 1, 2, 4. So
yeah.
So I mean, he's just okay. If you pick him to like some mages that don't have escapes, you can kind of do like what team did last season? United with Aurora, where they like hard farm me on, I think it was an SPL or it was against somebody else, where they pick like Kabrakan support and then 2 other characters and just hard farm the mage and mid with the Kabrakan wall.
Yeah, they can get a lot of value. That's why I would say that that's why I'd say he's probably A over B, just because I think his ult value is a little bit better than all the B characters' value when they get a good counter pick. Camazot's probably just a balanced character. I think he's around A. He is a flex pick because he can play jungle solo, and in solo he doesn't really lose any matchups, but some matchups he just doesn't win, and the character is kind of an early to mid game character. Late game, pretty easy to play around with anti-heal and just bursting him down. Envy's built tankier, like Bruiser. Late game he's not going to one-shot anybody. So he always has that threat of just going into the air, being untargetable and getting a lot of damage off when it comes to like the jungle with like a Heartseeker and like a full power build. But at the end of the day, I think there's some junglers that are just a little bit better than him, and I would just put him in A. Pretty balanced. Can't really go wrong with him, but a lot of times you're not going to you just absolutely pop off with him either.
Yeah, I think there's some Camo lovers in the league that play the character extensively, but I think for the most part, he has no CC immunity, which is, like I said, kind of just bad. I think the only thing that's really good about him is that he can take himself out of fights and make himself untargetable while still diving, but he doesn't really have much to offer besides damage, and I don't think that's valuable in the current day and age. Unless you have a full dive comp, and then you have Kama, and you have somebody else who can kind of take himself out of the fight as well, or just be like hard to kill / peel, then he'll feel okay. But besides that, I don't think he's that great.
Yep. Kerninos, I would say C tier. Personally, maybe his payoff is a little bit better because he can like insta kill objectives and kind of I guess that's it. He is very, very easy to dive and kill. Bad against thorns. Even though you would think he has an escape, so maybe he can get away from thorns, he doesn't really have an escape because he has no CC immunity. He has no CC immunity in his kit, and it's a very short dash, very easy, very telegraph. Can kind of just chase him down. I personally would say he's tier as a frontliner, but I think some people like Cernados just because he can do a lot of damage. I don't know. What do you think? I would say if you weren't to say C tier, I'd probably think you would say like B.
No, I think he's definitely below B. I was talking about this the other day. If they give him if they just fix his ult a little bit and then maybe rework the way his autos come out, because he's probably got some of the worst autos in the game, especially for like high attack speed builds. His autos just feel terrible to use.
Mm-hmm. His glaives,
and his passive too. I think that passive was like so weirdly designed for him to be like maybe a jungle hunter or something. But I just feel like if they were to rework his passive, give him CC immunity on the channel of his ult, and maybe like buff it somehow, because his ult is literally just Hera 2, but on like a 90-second cooldown and worse.
Yeah, and it's honestly harder to hit, which is
it actually is harder to hit because Hera 2 is like pretty wide, and it's like a nice line, whereas CERN 2 is like this. It's a big circle. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like a lot of people miss it, maybe more often than they should be, myself included. But I don't know. He's just a bad god, especially because his kit is so one-dimensional where he needs to be getting into beginning value, because you're not going to be using your dash to escape. That just feels really bad, especially because of like how much damage it does. So if you just play around him not being able to like insta-gib you through like a 2-3-4 combo, he just loses a lot of value. On top of that, he's just bad into thorns and the characters that are being played right now. So
yeah. Cerberus up next. I would say Cerberus A+. He got a buff to his cooldowns. Kind of does he's always done a ton of damage with his 2-1 combo for whatever reason. That both of the abilities do like 500 damage or something crazy. But you can still interrupt his 2. He's still like kind of a slow character in general, so he's kind of easy to go on late game and kill. But he's good into some of the sustained characters right now. Can be played support and solo. Gets a lot of value in both. And obviously is pretty good with Blink Thorns. And an underrated thing, or maybe not something that everybody realizes, is that his 2 has a magical shred on it, which is really good for Thorns because Thorns does magical damage. So if you go Blink Thorns on Cerberus with like a Void Stone or a Stone of Binding, you're basically doing true damage with your Thorns plus your abilities, which is really, really valuable on him. So the character is very valuable and would probably just be around A+.
Yeah, I think if you're missing your Cerb ones, you're feeling really bad. But you're just going to assume that like you're going to be hitting them for the character's like placement on a tier list. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think what's most valuable is that character's ability to just like insta kill a backliner by hitting a 1 from levels like 5 through 12. If that guy hits a mage with like a 1-2 combo, he will just like do 80% of their health, and all you need is somebody to like spit on the guy that they just hit.
Yeah.
And that'll be it. I think, I don't know. I think he's good. He's pretty like, he should be easy to play against, but if he hits all of his stuff, he just kind of farms you. And he's good into a healing meta where his passive obviously steals a lot of the healing. So
yeah, and the thing about him is you're right about the hitting your 1, but I would say once you get Blink Thorns in a team fight, if you Thorns and use your 2, you don't really have to stun them with your 1. As long as you get like maybe like a part of it hits them and stuff, you're still going to get a lot of value. The character kind of plays itself when it comes to team fights, at least when it comes to like the 2 plus Thorns combo. But early game, and especially in a lot of those skirmishes, you do want to be hitting your 1s to get the maximum value out of him. So that's why the character can be a little bit easier to play around if you don't hit your stuns. But Chalk, C tier. Yeah, I wouldn't say C tier. I actually think maybe he's a little bit better than the characters in C tier, like Bologna, just because he can't lose lane. The character cannot lose lane. It's basically impossible. And his mid game is pretty strong. Like memes aside, his mid game can be pretty strong from solo. The thing is, like, you never really experience it or realize it just because he's never played. But at the end of the day, his late game is really bad, and the character has always just kind of been easy to play around for the most part. Doesn't do enough damage with his full combo. He is getting buffed next patch, though. He is getting buffed next patch, and his 2 will now give you even more procs when you hit an enemy god with it. So that's going to be absolutely insane. But not really. It's not going to be that crazy. So maybe with that buff in mind, maybe we put him in B, but if it's probably hovering around C or B.
I think that character's team fight is terrible, man. Like,
yeah, his 1 is so slow.
Yeah, besides his ulti like popping off and smacking a million people, that that's probably the only way he'll ever be valuable. But I just feel like that guy just does not.
Thank you so much, Temple Run.
Like,
I
there's
appreciate
been games
it, man.
where I've seen
You're popping off.
a chalk solo 2-3 levels
Thank you,
ahead of me, and then he walks into a team fight, like gets hit by 1 CC, and then see you later, guy. You know, just done too much.
Yeah, I agree.
Probably, I think he's C tier. I think the characters in B tier, if you pick them for a good reason, they're just marginally better than chalk. You don't really have a reason to be picking chalk. Like, you're not looking at team comp. You're like, dude, give me chalk here. Like, that's looking good.
Yeah. Chang'e, I would say, is B tier. Or maybe A, just because she's kind of flexible, can be played solo mid and possibly jungle if you want to get crazy, but for the most part, it's solo mid. But I just think maybe with the Rod of Asclepius buff that's coming, it should be a little bit more valuable. Lotus Crown is pretty good right now, and she can be played in a lot of solo matchups and do pretty well, apart from, like, you know, I would say apart from maybe some of the bullies like Osiris, Arthur, and stuff like that. But even in those spots, she's really not that bad. So I would probably say B, just because I don't think her payoff is that amazing. She's not like a traditional healer. She doesn't heal like that much in fights and stuff. So
yeah, I think like it's just weird because sometimes I feel like Chang'es are doing work, and then sometimes I feel like she's just not doing anything. I feel like in fights where she gets multiple rounds of her abilities off, she'll feel great. But just getting those scenarios is, you know, hard to confirm that you're going to be popping off in team fights.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. She was pretty easy to play around. I feel like I can almost always tell when a chunk is about ult, which makes it easy to either use an active or jump away for her to dash, whatever the case may be. And I don't know. She's not a good Thorns user if you're playing her solo. She's not really a good mid pusher if you're playing her mid. Like, you're not really that comfortable walking up into the middle away to one because she's got close range clear. So I don't know. I think she's just okay, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. She's not very good with thorns, which is a really big deal. So kind of no reason to pick her over a character that can buy thorns. Wait, Chiron? I thought I had Cherno. Okay, Chiron, I guess. Chiron, kind of a flex pick, can be played ADC and mid, but you know, kind of easy to just run down for the most part, just because you can interrupt his dash pretty easily. And I would say that he doesn't get as owned by thorns, just because he can always go into his ult when he gets low and maybe get some value on the backliners with his ult, kind of like Rama. So it doesn't get as owned by thorns as a character like CERN or like Artemis or anything like that. So he's definitely more valuable than those characters, but he's not. Oh, what the heck? Oh my god, did we lose? Oh my god, we lost everything. Oh my goodness, we lost everything. What just happened? Why did it disappear? Oh no. That's okay.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.
No. I remember where we put everything. Or maybe we can just. Does it matter? Can we just? No. What we'll do is we'll just go from where we were, and then we'll have all the other characters where they were. Okay. Good.
Sure, man.
Okay. Just say yes.
I said yeah.
And
I said yeah, Dad. I said yeah, Dad.
Move tier. S+. We'll do some editing magic to make everything else show up. No big deal. All right, so where were we? Chiron?
Yeah, Chiron, then Churn.
Okay. So Chiron, what would you think about Chiron? I would say probably around B or A. Probably maybe A.
I think he's A.
He has no passive, so
he's like, yeah. I mean, his passive is actually not that terrible in lane for levels like 1 through 8. Especially if you're gonna go trans, because you're not gonna have any sustain, right?
Yeah.
I think if that character is like getting 3 bolts on backliners with a good like trans build, you will do 1,000,000 damage. But his dash is pretty telegraphed. The only CC immunity he has is his 1 in his ult, but his ult's like 20% movement speed, so you're not gonna use it to like run away or anything. And besides that, I don't know. I feel like he's an okay character if you pick him into comps where you're not going to be getting hard dove and can actually hit those backliners. If like Rama's not available, for instance, he'll probably feel pretty good. Besides that, I mean, he's probably not going to feel great. He is going to Thorns though, because he could buck the Thorns away. There you go.
That's true. Churn, I would actually put an A right away as well, just because I think he's good at diving, which is really important because he can kind of avoid the people with thorns. He can always ult into the backline and try and dive. And he can also go into a wall and kind of remove 3 seconds of the thorns and just sit there and wait for the thorns to go away, which is a pretty big deal. And he can make some plays in the early to mid game with the thorns or not with the thorns, but with his ultimate, so you can like ult over to fights and stuff like that. I would put him in A. What do you think?
Personally, I think Chern's like okay, I guess. He's got a really bad laning phase, in my opinion. He doesn't really have a great lane. I think if you're utilizing his ult, he'll feel pretty good using the character, or like being Chern in general, but I don't know. He's just like really bad early game, and you can kind of just always punish him for it. He is good at avoiding thorns because you can kind of go up like Rama can. You can go into a wall, but you're also limiting what you're doing in the team fight when you're doing that. So it's not like, oh, I'm doing so much in this team fight because I'm not dead to thorns, because at the end of the day, you're still zoning yourself from dealing damage to anybody, which is equally as bad as not dying or just dying to thorns and doing a bunch of damage. He's got a decent build path though, because his 2 is a steroid, and he does have a global ultimate that can be used pretty well in a competitive setting. So yeah. I'd say A tier is probably where he belongs.
Yep. I actually made it so everything's back. We're good. Kronos, horrible character. C tier in my opinion. Possibly D tier. They've nerfed the ring build, and even before, he wasn't even a character that you would pick. Like, you wouldn't pick him over Oleron, Freya, or even Sol, to be honest, to go the ring builds. And now that they've nerfed the ring builds and magical auto attackers aren't that great anymore, I don't know. Character's really easy to play around. And there's no real reason to pick him. Like, the only time he's meta is when those rings are broken, and if the rings are broken, you just wouldn't pick this character. You would pick Oleron, you would pick Freya, and you would probably pick even Sol, even though Sol is pretty bad in my opinion as well. Maybe you'd even pick Poseidon over him if you really wanted to go a ring magical character. So I just think the character's really bad.
Yeah, I agree. People are always asking me before, like, where's Kronos in the tier list? Where's Kronos in the tier list? I think that character strictly relies on items being good, and at that point he is not a good character in my opinion. Like you said, if the rings aren't good in the meta, then neither is Kronos, and even when the rings are good, you probably don't want to be Kronos.
Exactly. And you have to play him perfectly too. Like the character does have a pretty high skill cap. Like hitting like raw ones is hard, getting a really timed ultimate off is really hard, and obviously like hitting all your auto attacks and positioning well in a team fight as a character with no dash or like no self peel really. I mean, besides the stun, it's just not really worth it in my opinion. So, always just going to be kind of in the shadows of the other magical characters. Cthulhu, I would probably say S tier. Cthulhu is very, very valuable. One of the best frontliners. Very good with thorns because he can thorns and go into his ult and just get a ton of value in a fight. And the character, I mean, is still even in SPL, sometimes you'll see Cthulhu's get blown up, but at the end of the day, that's like a ton of organized team play, focusing down the character and really, trying to insta-kill him with certain actives, with certain characters and stuff like that. But it takes all that to just to kill him because he's so tanky and so ridiculous in his ultimate. So I would say the Cthulhu is probably S tier, one of the better frontliners in the game, one of the better guardians. But the only problem with Cthulhu is that once he's picked, you kind of know where he's going because he can only really be played solo. You could play him in support, but he's not really that great there.
Yeah, I think what's really valuable about Cthulhu and some of the other frontliners that are going to go on this list is their ability to kill people while thornsing. Cthulhu obviously has a pretty easy time doing a lot of damage with his ult and whatnot. And when he thorns, he kind of takes away like the playability into him, but he can also kill you while ulting just from raw damage.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of his bigger benefits, that not only is he a great anti-sieger with his 2 being like the size of the entire lane, he's a great team fighter. He's got an AoE heal, and if people aren't building anti-heal, that heal actually does do a good bit of work in team fights. And yeah, all around, he's a pretty sick character. I think a well-piloted Cthulhu is a ranked/SPL nightmare.
Yep, and the funny thing about Cthulhu is that he's a teamfight monster, but his lane is always good. He's actually a bully in most matchups, and if you just go Warrior's Blessing and auto attack the enemy solo plus the wave because you have really sick autos, you're literally going to win almost every matchup and bully people out. So he's good in the lane always, kind of hard to kill in lane always, and is also very, very good in team fights. So pretty silly. Kukolin, kind of weird because I have always liked Kukolin, but I honestly think the character is probably around B tier. He does get a lot of value in the early game just because he gets a ton of pressure with his transformations, and if you play it really well with getting your ultimates off on cooldown and transforming and looking for blue buffs and stuff like that, you can snowball a little bit. But when it comes to the team fights, the character is pretty easy to play around, and he just doesn't have enough damage to kill backliners. Like, it's pretty easy to lock him down and kill him before he can get all of his damage off. because he does have a decent amount of like channel times and like getting into his transformation and then using all those abilities. And through all that time, he kind of just can get whacked and killed. He is pretty good with thorns, but like I said, I just don't think he has enough base damage, to be honest, to kill people when he's diving.
Yeah, I think a Cullen's pretty easy to play around as a backlighter. I'm never really scared of a Cullen. The only time they're like really hard to play around is if they're fed and are just killing you through like
in the mid game, even late game. Like it's nothing.
Besides that, I don't think he's very hard to play around. He is a good thorns user because he is also a character that can kind of just farm the shit out of you with his damage while thornsing. But don't think it's like, I just don't think it's difficult to play around him. And I don't know how good his lane is, but I don't think he's that like insane at team fighting because doesn't do like much of anything.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He wins. I mean, he does well in a lot of lanes, but the solo meta right now, in my opinion, is you go Blink Thorns or you go like a double team fight relic, and you're useful in team fights. You're no longer just like a lane bot. Like solo laners do a lot of work in fights, so there's not a real reason to pick a character like that. Because there's characters that can bully better than him and also do more in team fights. So Cupid, I would say probably A+ or S. One of the better ADCs right now, can get a lot of early kills after the recent buffs to his kit and the heart bomb, like levels 1 through 5. It just has a ton of kill potential. Very good in a meta where people kind of rely on dashes and escapes to get to be safe, and his cripple gets a lot of value from his ultimate. And then also, the character has gotten a lot of buffs over the years. His heal is underrated. His attack speed, he has passive attack speed on his 3, so he actually does a lot of team fight damage. Because you basically always have an attack speed steroid up, which is pretty nice for him. So I would say one of the better ADCs, probably around S tier. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say Cupid is most likely S. He's just good. Like I used to think Cupid was good before he got like his quality of life buff, and then the meta kind of warped into like if you have an attack speed steroid, you're good. And Cupid's always just been like a very hard character to deal with in the ADC lane because of his ult / consistent kill pressure on you. Late game his heart's heal for like 600-700, which is about a fourth of a carry's life bar and like a sixth of a tank's life bar. So if you just play team fights like pretty slow / organized where you're dropping the hearts consistently and getting good healing off, then he becomes like a multi what's the word I'm looking for here, like multi-use character where he can blow up frontline but can also be like a sustained character healer. And yeah, he's just like super good against frontliners because most frontliners are like either jumping in to deal damage or jumping out to live, and you obviously can't jump through a cripple. And he just farms almost every single ADC 1v1, which makes it extremely hard to play around that lane and play in his lane. So
yeah. Daji, pretty bad character, horrible into shell. Because her one does most of her damage late game. You kind of want to blink in, get your one off, and then go into the ult. But if you're not getting your ult, like the thing about Daji is that she's more of a mid to late game character anyway, because she can kind of one shot people with like a Hydra's block plus her one going into the ult. She's untargetable and get a lot of damage off proc beads and all that. But all of that is gone when people just go upgraded shell, because when you blink in one, you don't get that off. So then when you go into your ult, they're still full health and you're getting no value out of it. So the character gets very, very hard owned by shell. If people aren't going shell, the character can be obviously better, probably around A tier, but as long as you buy upgraded shell against this character, she's going to be absolutely horrible in my opinion. So probably around C tier.
Yeah, I think she might be a little bit better because she's getting like the pretty.
She's getting buffed.
Yeah, I think that's the only reason I'd put her in a tier higher if I were to. But if you're a good carry into Daji and you have shell and you use your relics well, then she just has very low value. And she's not like a high skill ceiling character where like if you're really good with her kit, you can do a lot of work or something. Like she's one dimensional, she blinks in, ones you, or she threes in, ones you, and then it goes up into the ult. But if she's not getting that 50% of your health late game with like that 1+ bleed proc, then she's just not doing anything. Yeah. I think it's fairly easy to play around that. So.
Yeah. And the thing is, people are probably like, no, I feel like she owns me. How come my support doesn't like shell me when she goes in? Honestly, if you feel like Daji's owning you, you should be the one buying shell. If you're a mid laner or an ADC and there's a Daji on the enemy team, just buy shell, and then when she goes in, she'll literally do nothing to you. So that's why the character is where she is right now, at least. But maybe the buffs will make her a little bit better. I'd say Discordia is probably A tier, pretty balanced god. She's not picked a ton right now, but I think maybe she's a little bit underrated in all honesty. And I don't, in my opinion at least, whenever I play like mid and ranked and stuff, I kind of do well on the character. I don't know why. I kind of feel like the character is just like a character that you can pick in a lot of scenarios and just feel fine. Maybe you're not going to feel amazing. Like the payoff isn't as good as like a Hebo with like blink one-shotting people and carrying a game, or like a Merlin doing absolutely a million damage late game if you get to that point. But you can't really go wrong with the character in my opinion. So I think that kind of makes her A tier, just kind of like a balanced character.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's like relatively safe, but also not that safe because her dash is super duper short. And if you're not really playing around her like passive, then she doesn't really do anything like super well. She's just okay into like hard dive because she does have immunity frames in her 3. It is a dash, so you can get over things like Cabrakanal and Odin Wall and things like that, whereas other gods can't.
I would say that the one thing she does well is she's pretty good in siege scenarios. She's a pretty good anti-sieger because her long range 2 can proc. So that scenario, she's pretty good, but in that, it's most of the time defensively, so you don't really want to be like losing a game to be valuable. But
yeah, I think there's also like very easy outplay potential. Like when I played the character last season, that ult is pretty easy to jump or like dash away from because it travels so slowly.
They did buff it since then, remember?
Sure, but even a good jungler will be able to just like hop on over it and things like that.
Yeah.
She does still take like some time to channel out, and she makes a sound. She does have like some weird interactions with her wand where like if you're trying to like one over walls and stuff, you kind of just can't. Like it just bounces in front of the wall, and
yeah, it's buggy. Same with her ult. The visuals on her ult sometimes are so weird and can look like the apple's going one way, but then all of a sudden it hits you. It's really weird.
Yeah, and I think like losing the ability to poke over walls pretty consistently is kind of bad. Not that you can't do it, but it's just like really awkward which walls you can do it over. And I think if you're like hard diving the character, she's just as bad as any other mages, but she's just relatively safe for like mid game and stuff. And she is kind of just a walking passive, and if you use it well, you can win the game off it. So.
Yeah, her passive can be very, very valuable in the early game, especially for soul laners and in ADC or ADC / support. You know, when you're fighting a lot in duo, it can kind of be a trump card in that scenario. Erlang's probably, especially considering ranked, that's probably A+. I would probably say S, actually. I mean, he's probably one of the best junglers in the game. He's also a flex. He can be played solo. I don't think he's really that valuable there. You could play him there if you really wanted to. But I would say maybe his best 2 roles are definitely jungle number 1, and then maybe support, just because you can maybe get some cheese early kills running people down, especially in like, I don't know, from like bronze probably up all the way up to diamond. You could probably do well with him. But probably one of the better junglers in the game, so I would say he's S tier. The kin size build with him is just ridiculous. You can go like an objective build with him, where you can shred objectives with like stone cutting Xe, or you can go like the one-shot build with like Crusher, Erendite, stone cutting, stuff like that. He just one-shots people still. The character is still ridiculous, and I would say that makes him probably S tier.
Yeah, I think Erlang has too many forms of CC to just be like not valuable in some way, shape, or form. Whether you're like using him as a what's the word? Like what's something that like
Initiator?
an enabler? Yeah, somebody that like allows another role to do something.
Facilitator.
A facilitator. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And I think he's just like a good carry killer / like lock downer. Those are words. And he's good. Yeah, I think he's just a good character, and he's really good into Gods Like Cthulhu because he has the ability to build cannons and just go on him.
Yeah, plus his passive. So Faf probably around A tier, pretty balanced, I would say. Kind of a greedier pick for support role. That's the only role he's viable in. So maybe if he was a flex pick, he'd be more valuable. But he's just kind of a greedy pick that you don't want to pick him in a lot of your ranked games when you're just going to get run down because his lane isn't that strong. But you know, like a good Fafnir is always going to be really good, especially in the mid to late game. Pretty hard to kill in the mid to late game unless you have like counter picks into him. Maybe he's B or just beer. Maybe he's B just because his lane and early game isn't as strong. What do you think? I think you have better input about this.
I think Fafnir kind of concedes lane pressure, which can be quite valuable in higher levels of ranked and in the SPL. I think he has a pretty good payoff, but if he doesn't get to that point where he can kind of like jump in, hammer, ult, and then, you know, pop off and stuff like that, then he's just not going to be like that valuable. But I think he's okay. I don't know. I'd say he's B tier, and if you pick him into a good comp, you can do a lot of work. But for the most part, he's just like a pretty risky pick that doesn't really do much unless you're one, extremely accurate with your abilities, and two, into the wrong comp, he can just literally, like, when you ult, you can just die off of it because of like some using the game, like Poseidon, Whirlpool, and things like that are just going to keep you in that place, and then you're kind of just a sitting duck for ADCs hitting you. And mages popping you. So unless you're on the front foot and you're getting in there and you're getting nice hammers off and whatnot, and you're making good use of your steroid and burning objectives with them and stuff like that, then it's just going to be like, just. So yeah, probably B tier.
Yeah, I agree. If there's a B+, I think maybe we'd have a lot more characters around there. Just because I'm going to put him in A. He's probably more, like, there's probably a lot of characters we put up in B+, but...
The B tier characters, for sure. So probably A.
Yeah. Fenrir up next. He recently got buffed. I don't think the character is that amazing, but he is a flex pick. Kind of going to be played in a lot of roles. He can be good as a frontliner. He can be good as a damage dealer. Is a good counter pick into Hebo, which is a pretty meta pick right now. But I would say that he's probably more of a counter pick, so that makes him more B tier. Still not that great of a character, but can be good in the right scenarios, and that's kind of the whole list. That's kind of the whole B tier anyway. So, yeah, that's all there is to it for me.
Yeah, I think Fenrir. Like the only thing that Fenrir is good at is just like soloing backliners.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't think he's very valuable. Just in the, I don't know. It's just like weird. He just doesn't do anything. Also, a lot of what he wants to do, if he's not soloing backliners, is just plucking tanks, and then like bringing the tanks into his team to kill. But most tanks nowadays are just like, oh, there's a Fenrir, I'm just gonna go beads, and then he is mega useless. So.
Freya gotten a few nerfs and stuff, not as valuable. The rings got nerfed as well. She is still hard to deal with in ranked, I think, for a lot of ranked players across all levels, just because people go double lifesteal, and even if you build anti-heal, she can be a little bit oppressive, but I wouldn't really want to play her into Thorns over a lot of other safe characters, because she's not very safe, pretty easy to dive. So I'd probably put her in B.
Yeah, I think Freya's she's like got no pressure for the lane, and the rings have been nerfed. Although I don't think like the Hecate nerf really mattered that much, because she's still really, really useful with all the other rings. But yeah, she's just got no pressure. A lot of what was good about her before is that you can go in early Hecate and, you know, kind of just bully out the other person / anybody ganking you. But now that's not really an option anymore after all the nerfs. She just kind of reverts back to her old self, where you can probably pick her in some games and completely pop off and shit on people with your 1-2 proc and whatnot and look like the best character in the game. But for the most part, it's just like, it doesn't matter. So
yeah, she's a weird character, because in some scenarios she will look like, oh my god, this is the best character in the game, but honestly I think that's just kind of a noob stomp sometimes, which, you know, I mean, it's a good point, and maybe the character is valuable for that reason, but I think B is fine. Ganesh, I would say A. Pretty good character. Or not, I wouldn't say pretty good character. I would say he's just a balanced character and can counter certain gods. Like Tsukiyomi's a really good pick right now, and I think Ganesh is pretty good into him, because Tsukiyomi can basically never use his 2, which is his best ability. So that's kind of good counter matchup. But, you know, just kind of a balanced god. I would say that you can pick him a lot. Like, you could probably top pick him a lot in ranked and never feel like absolutely horrible. But at the same time, he's not going to be as valuable and have much of as much of a payoff as some other supports. And he's obviously not going to win you the game in the first 10 minutes like other supports can. So,
yeah, I think Ganesh is kind of like a walk-in ult, where I feel like he has a really big ult. He will do 1 million damage in a team fight. But if he doesn't, he kind of won't do anything in a team fight. Like, his peel is pretty subpar compared to other supports. You're not really like, you can't really 3 people off carries and whatnot, and your silence is nice, but it doesn't really do much.
Yeah.
In like team fights where people have like CC immunities going and whatnot, Davers or CC and just popping all their abilities anyways. So yeah, I think he's very hit or miss. He can be good into some comps, but he is pretty much just like a walking ult. You hit a sick ult, you can win the game. You hit a battle, you only hit a tick, or you don't hit any ticks, then it's just like, what am I even doing on this character?
The way I see it a lot of times as well is like when we're doing the tier list is if any of the characters in A+ or above were nerfed, I'd be like, okay, that actually makes sense. Like if Cerberus, even though Cerberus isn't like absolutely ridiculous right now, if his 2 or 1 got nerfed, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. They were doing a little bit too much damage, and like that's like, you know, it's fine. But if Ganesh got nerfed, that's why I have him in A. If Ganesh got nerfed, I'd be like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, because you never like play against Ganesh and be like, oh my god, this character is just so ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing about his kit that's like hard to play around and just does a little bit too much. So I don't really think he needs to be nerfed or buffed or anything. That's why I think he's an A. He's just a balanced character. So, Geb, payoff late game is really good, but it's hard to get there. And because it's really hard to get there a lot of the time, I would put him in B. Possibly, no, because I would say his payoff is so good that he's probably around B.
Yeah, I think Geb suffers the same issues a lot of the supports suffer, where they're kind of just conceding lane. But if he does get late game, he will farm the fuck out of team fights just because he's so useful with the shield. He's got a huge AoE CCO. He's got, a knock up. He just does super well into dive. And he also is a really good diver. And he's okay with thorns. He's not the best, but he's all right.
Yeah.
And he's just a good god if he gets late game, but trying to get to late game is the problem with the character. And if you get shut down early, then you become kind of useless. So
yeah, you kind of throw away a lot of pressure when you pick Geb, so that's the biggest problem with him. And his shield can counter a lot of characters, but that still makes him a counter pick. You're not just going to top pick him and feel amazing every time. Guan Yu, interesting character, got buffed recently. Pretty good. Good as a flex because he can be played solo, support, and jungle if your name is Captain Twig or Layers or something like that. But I would say that makes him A+. Pretty good as a flex pick. Pretty good in solo and support, but I would say late game, in my opinion, even with Thorns, still very easy to play around for a carry. Can still kind of just kill him and his Horus. And I would say that Guan Yu has and always will be a mid-game monster, but not a late-game monster. People always like, just pick Guan and get to late game. His late game really isn't that good. It's his mid-game that's really where he shines. So you can do a lot right now with him in the mid-game because of his buffs. So A+ in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Guan got that buff on his 3, right? And that made him like super, super OP early game because he just does so much damage. I think he's also
the archers.
I think he's like a solo lane bully for like pressure and whatnot, which can lead to totems, which is a big deal. And he is a really, really big like mid-game teamfight menace where he'll show up basically like a level or 2 ahead of you, just the way the game and the lanes work. And then he'll pop his thorns and horse on a carry. And if you don't have a CC immunity to either immune the stun and get out afterwards, or like a dash/dump to just get away from that Guan, he will just 100 to 0 you and insta-kill you.
Yeah.
With all his damage. So, and he's a good Thornser, which is a perk. So, yeah,
just make sure you Thorns before you horse because you can't use it in your horse. Hachiman, speaking of horses, I would probably say A tier. Pretty balanced god. I'd say Hachiman's just a balanced god. Pretty much A. You're not gonna play him over like other ADCs because he's not gonna have the kill pressure that Cupid brings. He's not gonna have the late game safety and carry potential like that a Rama would bring, or safety like a Haim would bring. But he's still pretty safe with his ult and his dash, and he still does a decent amount of damage and carry potential. Decent amount of objectives with his too. Not like amazing, but maybe it helps a little bit. I'd say just pretty balanced character. Just another one of those like ADCs that's A tier that you can't like really go wrong with.
Yeah, I think I said earlier that Anhur is like the Agni of hunters, but I think Hachiman might be a better example where he's just like a good god and has always been a good hunter and he's just solid all the time. But he can feel pretty lackluster if you get kind of behind, but so can every other ADC. And I think a big perk of his kit is having infinite mana sustain with his passive. He's got a pretty decent build path and he's pretty good into all the meta hunters, which just makes him a little bit more valuable. And I think he's a good character. You can probably pick him in any scenario, whenever you want, and probably do just all right with him. And his kit's also pretty good into thorns. So,
yeah, that's true.
He's a good character. Probably A, maybe A+ if there, but he'd be low A+. Probably just A, like high A.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll put him in A+. Why not? I think he's maybe a little bit more. He can be picked in more scenarios than a lot of these characters in A. So, Hades. I think Hades is a ranked menace, especially in solo lane. He wins literally every lane and can snowball games super, super hard. But that's all he's good at. He's not good in any other role, and he's only good at snowballing. Not a very good character if the game's even come mid late game. So, because of that, I'd put him in B. The payoff and the counter pick potential maybe is amazing, but just because he's very, very one-dimensional, and as long as the enemy solo laner kind of knows how to play around it, you won't snowball too hard. I would put him in B. Maybe A. Maybe it's just ridiculous, the snowball potential. Maybe not though. I don't know.
No, I think just generally speaking, Hades is like a B tier character. I think he can do some work, like you said, in the right scenarios and like with good utility or utilization of like his pressure. But come team fights, it's not very hard to deal with. He kind of can just die in his ult. And I don't know. I just feel like he's kind of just useless unless he gets really far ahead.
His 3 is a horrible ability in team fights.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's definitely B tier. He's not really good at Thornsing either. I mean, he's okay because he can Thorns ult, but
yeah, you can jump out of that and then just chill and just wait.
Character. So
yeah, once his ult is down in a team fight, if you just jump out of his ult and he also Thorns during his ult, then you just wait a few seconds. He's not like Arthur where he'll chase you down and still do a lot of damage to you. Maybe have another charge up, maybe have a stun up. Like after he ults and Thorns, it's like okay, you're literally useless. So. Speaking of useless, just kidding. This character is definitely not useless. I would say Hebo. I would say A+. Maybe S still. He did get nerfed recently. Got a couple nerfs. Nerf to his 2 and nerf to his 1. But I don't think it's really that big of a deal. And when it comes to rank, this is probably one of the best characters you can pick in the game to just win rank games. He just snowballs rank games. He has so much 1v1 potential, especially when it comes to like jungler's diving him. He can be played in mid and jungle. Has a pretty easy build path. You can build a lot of different ways on him and still do well on him. I would say actually S tier. I think the character is still S tier even after his nerfs.
Yeah, I think Hebo just has like 3 ultimates damage wise.
Yeah,
it's be really nice for him.
I mean, his 2 is an ultimate based on utility. That 2 is insane.
Yeah, I guess he just has a very valuable kit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you get into the mid game, that character is just always going to be like extremely hard to play around because he just like one shots everything you want to do. But I think slowly but surely people are finding like good matchups into him. Like we've seen like Arthurs and Guans and whatnot, and just like different gods that kind of just can run the character down and not worry about his burst damage. Mostly comes from the soul laners. But if that character is getting multiple rounds of 1s and 3s off in team fights, he kind of just farms the shit out of everything.
Mm-hmm. He does have a lot of counter matchups, but as far as rank goes, if you just kind of snowball with him, there's not going to be like those slow down games where people wait for their solo to rotate to own the Hebo. Like a lot of the time you're just going to farm regardless, so you can get a lot of wins with the character. And
I think his 2 is just nuts. So he has like crazy damage that's pretty easy to hit for the most part, and like an insane other ability that offers like team wide utility, and it just feels really really nice to have with you and like just have for yourself. So yeah,
too much value for an easy character
because you can kind of kite away from it with this too.
Unless
he's like ulting into Thorns, or like if the Thorns is really good and he waits for his ultimate like sound to go off when he throws his ult, sure. But besides that, he's just a really good character.
Yeah, there's not an ability that he has where it's like, oh, I can't take that back. You can literally just sit there 2 away, kind of watch, wait for the Thorns to go away, and then start clicking your 1 and 3 again and stuff like that. L, A+ in my opinion. Healing is always really valuable in ranked. Kursonk, upgraded Kursonk does own her. She did get some nerfs after she was being played a crap ton last split. But still a pretty valuable character. Healing will always just destroy in ranked, and even in SPL, like healing can be pretty oppressive sometimes. But pretty easy to get on her, I would say. She does get more value that Thorns is being meta, just because Thorns doesn't really do a whole lot to her. She can kind of decide when to use her abilities. She doesn't have to just throw them out there, and she can always just heal and run away and then heal up the Thorns damage and all that. So I would say pretty valuable. I am like kind of teetering on putting her in S, but I think A+ is probably the place for her.
Yeah, I think healing will always be valuable, no matter what meta we're in. Mm-hmm. Just because just having in fight and out of fight sustain is just always going to feel pretty good.
She forces builds too. She like forces people to build Kursonk. She forces people to get anti-heal right away and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think she's good. I think if she's getting multiple rounds of her her like healing off in team fights, she's just going to be popping off. So, but she is pretty easy to dive and like generally squishy, but if you go a little bit of tankiness, a little bit hybrid, then you are feeling good on the character. And if you're a good Hell / your team is good at playing with Hell, then that pick can be extremely difficult to deal with and play around.
Agreed. Heim is up next. Probably put Heim in A+. Has a lot of payoffs because he's very safe, very hard to gank, pretty hard to kill in team fights because if you don't have CC immunity for result, he can send somebody to Niflheims and he can TP away. Has the knock-up immunity on his 2, so a lot of characters maybe lose some value against that. So he has a lot of good positives. The only thing I would say for Heim is that if you do have CC immunity for result, it's pretty hard for him to get a ton of value in the late game team fights, as far as like diving him. But he can go oboe and go up tank shredding build and kind of get a lot of damage off regardless. So he still has that hyper carry potential, and it will always just kind of be a pretty good pick. And I would say is probably just around A+.
Yeah, I don't think Heim has many like hard counters or anything. I think like cripples kind of can farm the character, but besides that, he's just always going to be pretty good with just how much his kit has to offer. Yeah, I think if you're a good Heim, you should always feel pretty good at the character. The only time the character feels a little awkward is in team fights where the pace of the team fight's constantly changing from like who's winning and who's losing the team fight. Crystal placement can alter a lot. And there will be times where like you'll have a crystal set up defensively and then you're like starting to win the team fight. So you set up an aggressive crystal and then you get gone on and then you're just as easy to dive as any other character is, assuming the diver has a beads.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's just a good character. His build path is fine just because his like passive auto attack damage, like the way it's just higher than every other character, is kind of just saving him from being banned in this meta. And he just does a shit ton of damage. He's pretty safe laner. He's extremely hard to gank. He has vision all over the map that he offers to his teammates. He's just an all around good character. I don't think he's quite S or S plus or anything, just because like there's a good chance you win when you have the character if you play him well. But he is just overall extremely solid. So yeah, and he's good to Thorns because you could ult the Thorns are away, TP away. There's a lot of different abilities that he has to abilities to play the fight. So yeah.
Hera, I would say A, but maybe A+. There's people that do really well with her, and you see her played in the SPL quite a bit, or at least a decent amount by some people. But I guess Argus does get a lot of value in this diving meta that we're in, where people will be diving a lot. You can throw Argus onto the backline, and it'll do a lot of work. Polymorph is really good for self-peel against the people diving you, and especially against Thorns, because, it's just going to reflect a little bit of damage, but you'll be fine for 2 more seconds. I'll probably say A, but I'd probably maybe put her in A+, just because she's probably one of the better mages. She's not, I wouldn't say, she's probably not in the same category as like a Discordia or other characters like that. Probably a little bit more valuable, so A+, probably.
Yeah, I think A+ is where she rightfully belongs. I think a big reason she's so good is that she's really hard to thorns against. Like, which part of your kit are you thornsing?
Yeah.
Most of her damage comes from Argus just farming, whether it's a backliner or like a frontliner or an objective.
And it reflects to Argus, which is really good.
Yeah, it reflects to Argus, so it's like the hair doesn't even care. Like, go ahead, thorns the Argus, you'll kill the Argus a little faster, but what does that really mean for the character herself?
Mm-hmm.
And she's got a polymorph, which is kind of just an instant beats forcer, and it's up pretty often. Her shield's extremely hard to get through, and it's up quite often. And I think she's just like a really, really solid mage. And if she's not getting like insta-gibbed off of dives somehow, then she's just going to do insane work in team fights.
Yeah. Hercules got nerfed, and Hercules is one of those characters that I think, like, in SPL, he's ridiculous on some players, like playing him in support, especially because he can just get so much early pressure and so much kill potential. But across all of ranked, I don't think a lot of supports really know how to play him that well, and they kind of just maybe feed a little bit, don't get as much value. So because of that, I would put him a little bit lower, probably around A, because he's really not that great in solo right now. Just, a lot better picks that do a lot more, and can also lose certain lanes. So I'd probably put him in A. The payoff is pretty strong just because he has that kill potential early and can kind of carry, so maybe A+. What do you think?
I think going off of the logic you brought up, where he's like, this is in like an SPL only tier list, you have to consider ranked players and like cringe sharks who miss all their abilities and whatnot, but are just not two backliners. I'd say he probably is A. I think if you were to like base this tier list strictly off the best Hercs in the game, he'd probably be higher. But I mean, there's negative connotations of picking him as well. You're forcing a warrior support, which means you're not going to have a guardian, which means you have another physical. There's just like, if you're missing all of his abilities, he's not going to do anything. If you pick him into like huge CC comps, he can get blown up easily and not do a lot of work. But if you're a good Herc and you're hitting your blocks off like consistently, you're doing damage, you're getting in there, you're using your ult efficiently, you are just going to solo everything in your path. But doing that means you have to be really good at the character / just a really good player. So for that reason, not everyone can just pick up the character and be like, oh, look, I'm Polar Bear Mike now. So
yeah. Horus is weird because my first intention is to put him in A+, because I think the character is pretty easy. His ult is hard to use, but everything else about his kit is pretty easy, and you can run at people really hard and be really safe. So you can kind of carry early games, get a lot of early kills, can carry ranked games with it from the support role. So my first intention is to put him in an A+, but it feels weird because I think Herc is probably a little bit better than Horus if you played correctly, but it kind of just makes like a good Herc is better than a Horus, but most Hercs are probably just around A, whereas Horus can kind of always get value and be around A+. Maybe I'd put him in A. I don't know. It is a physical, so it does force that physical comp that you were just talking about. Kind of need a magical from somewhere, but maybe A is the best place for him.
Yeah, I think kind of same logic applies. He's got that physical dynamic where you're missing a guardian, meaning you might have 4 physicals, which means you're going to be easier to build around, and you'll be able to quickly tell the difference between a great Horus and like an Ech Horus. Same thing with Hercs. And I think they're generally in like the same position. Herc might be a little bit more like relevant in the meta and what he can do. But like if your name is Guan Yu, you can be up in the plus tier and be the best horse in the game and consistently pop off. But if it's just a random horse, I'd say he's all right. But I do think if they're putting them in the same tier, he is higher than Herc, only because if you're playing Horus into Herc, you're actually canceling a lot of what that Hercules wants to do, mostly in the laning phase, which is where I feel like Hercs shine the most.
That's true. That's a good matchup.
Yeah, I'd say probably A, maybe A+, but at the same time, you could put Herc A+, but I feel like it's all dependent on the player and everything else. So
yeah. This is a tough one. Hou Yi. I'd probably put him in A, maybe even B, but the reason I think the character, well, you may have reasons for why he's not as valued in lane, but I think the character isn't as valued in general right now because he's another character that when he clicks 4, he's decided to use that ability, and if somebody decides that they're going to Thorns it, he can't take it back. So then he's going to be in a spot where even if he is able to jump away, he's still reflecting damage to himself, and he's still not getting a lot of value out of his ultimate. So he's kind of like, okay, well, I'm just a character with 3 abilities now. So it can be good around objectives for like ulting the objective and like bursting it when it gets low, but for the most part, I think the character is less valuable now because of just like Thorns.
Yeah, I think Hou Yi is just this weird pick where he could feel really good, but he can also feel really bad just because he has no CC immunity. His ult's like all right, but you're not always getting the most use out of it. He kind of relies on hitting the 1, so if you're not like really accurate at the 1s, you're not getting much value out of his like 2. And I think the biggest part is that he has a pretty weak build path and is just not like insanely good into like the meta hunters, like Cupid and whatnot. And it's just pretty easy to dive. So yeah, I think he's A. He's all right into Thorns, but I mean, like you said, if you drop the ult and Thorns in it, although it's not that much damage, if like a tank's in your Hou Yi ult, you're not like, oh no, I need to stop this right now. But
yeah,
I don't know. I think a lot of his issues come from he has to kind of focus on a single target, and even then he's not like great to Thorns. So if you 2 somebody with Thorns and then you go on them and they pop their Thorns, then you're kind of like locked in on this one god, and you're marginally weaker against other characters because your 2's already on somebody. He has no CC immunity. He's not a great laner. He doesn't have a good build path, and just a lot of like bad things come when you pick that character. So he's probably A. Could maybe argue B, but I'd say like B+ if anything, but most likely A.
Okay. Agreed. I think Hun Batz probably A+. They recently reverted the nerf to his ult, so it's no longer like, well, I think then they reverted it, but then they reverted the revert, so it's like kind of in between now or something. I don't really know. I still think the character is really good. The character will always be valuable because his ultimate can do so much. It can insta-kill carries, it can force actives, it can kill frontliners really well, it can space out a team fight. And then also the character's jungle clear is pretty good ever since they buffed his 3 for the extra bounce. So his early to mid game really isn't that bad either. Can kind of farm, can be played a certain be played a different or a lot of different ways is what I'm trying to say. And he's good with blink, and blink is what you want as a jungler. So probably A+, one of the better junglers probably in most scenarios.
I think he kind of has like the same dynamic as some characters where like he's kind of a walking ult, but he's a little bit more versatile. Like he doesn't just need his ult to do work, but for the most part, you're playing heavily around that ult. What's nice is that the ult cooldown is much shorter than most active cooldown. Well, all active cooldowns, obviously. So you should be able to get like force a carries beads in a team fight, or like just a gank or something, and then they have to kind of permanently be scared of getting Hun Batz ult in the next team fight, which has a lot of value. I think he's okay. He's really good at forcing actives. He's a pretty big team fighter, and I'd say probably A+. He's got some counters, but I mean, I think you can comfortably pick the character and do good work with him.
Mm-hmm. Isis, I think she's pretty horrible. Probably B or even C. In my opinion, the main reason for it is that Kursonk really owns her ult, so you kind of get no value out of your ultimate late game. Thorns also owns her ult, because if you just kind of dive her and sit in her ult, then there's another character that's like, okay, I guess I have to Aegis my own ultimate. That's going to feel horrible. And, of course, her first 3 abilities can be okay early to mid, but a lot of things can interrupt her one. It's a long duration, so you kind of want to get the full 4 hits of it out. And even if you do, you kind of have to be close to hit him with it. So it's like you're kind of putting yourself in a bad position to even do your damage. And I would say just pretty hard character to play perfectly, because she's just so easy to play around as an enemy.
Yeah, I think she was good at like Worlds, but then got some nerfs, and now the meta is just really not that character. Like you said, you can drop your ult sometimes, and you're like, well, I'm gonna get some nice healing, and then you see maybe an Onk or a Thorns or just a bunch of anti-heal applied, because most divers have a lot of anti-heal nowadays. And then you're like, well, I went from being extremely confident with my ultimate, like full healing me or doing a bunch of damage, and then either all that damage getting reflected to yourself, or she just kind of doesn't do anything with the ult. I think if you use her ultimate as like a huge objective burst, and you like build a comp around trying to do objectives and whatnot, then it's nice to have that character. But that's like a very unique playstyle that has to be practiced extremely and like played extremely well to actually work. And just in general, I think she's just a very weak character that kind of just gets W keyed and killed. So yeah.
Izanami, I don't really know. I mean, she always has that potential where sure you can do like some early game cheese traps with her clear because it's so sick. But I think if you're playing against any decent player, they're just gonna fight you because her level 1 is really, really bad. Actually, her probably level 1 through 5 is really bad at fighting. So for the most part, as long as the people you're playing against know what they're doing, you can kind of shut her down, and then she gets absolutely no value because her autos are horrible. They're just like probably the worst autos in the game. And for a character that wants to be an auto attacker, that is an auto attacker, having bad autos is a big deal. So I would probably say maybe the character is C tier.
Yeah, I'd say C tier. I would definitely say C tier. I think she's just a bad god. She's like her. I mean, honestly, I'd argue she's probably even D tier, but like, I guess you can like utilize her autos somewhat for pressure. And there's like some games, if you're basing off high rank, you can maybe snowball with the character. But I don't know. She's just a terrible god. Her autos feel terrible. Her ult is hard to hit. It's terrible. Her 2 is like the slowest moving projectile in the game. Does nothing but some damage and like a baby slow or something like that. And
if you get kills with it, though, it goes up. It gets more value.
It goes up. Oh, that's good. Yeah, all you need to do is get kills.
It's weird.
Specifically with the 2, which is the most troll part. Too,
yeah,
like,
that's really weird.
That's like saying you have to save your 2 to get the last hit of a kill when you want to use your 2, and then your 4 when they're slowed. And it's just like, well,
nothing
really makes sense. And she's just like terrible. I'd probably say she's D tier, honestly, but I mean, you can leave her at C. Probably C minus.
Yeah, the only reason I put her C is just because I think across all ranked, her pressure can be a little bit cheese for wins. So, yeah. Janice up next. Janice Dude, Janus is weird because I think he's actually a little bit better now that like he can just run away from people with thorns, so that's really good for him. But he is kind of one-dimensional. If you miss your 2, you're gonna do absolutely nothing, and like a really good Janus player is gonna get a lot of value out of the ultimate, whereas like a decent Janus player is probably not gonna do all that much with the ultimate. So you're kind of just trying to hit 2s to be valuable. So I'd probably say B. If this was before, I'd probably put him in C, just because whenever I see a Janus on my team, I'm like, okay, we lose the game. But now that like Thorns is like kind of relevant and stuff, he can get away from Thorns. So for that reason, I put him in B.
Yeah, I think like if you're Whirlwind and your team really good at playing with the character, and you've got like strat built around the character, and just like your team is very comfortable with the playstyle, the character can feel great. But the dynamic that Janus brings to the team kind of means that you're going to be solo defending against dive as a hunter.
Yeah,
which is very bad.
Being left alone.
He's not a tank killer. He's probably the opposite of that. That's why you'll see a lot of soul laners and guardians go very little to sometimes even no magical defense in comps against Janus, because they're just not afraid of him killing him. All you need is some health so he doesn't insta-kill you, and then you're just good to go. And overall, I think the character's pretty dang weak. Doesn't really do like anything crazy well. But if you're a good team, or if you're just a really good Janus and you never miss a snipe in a 2-in-a team fight, by all means pick him. Besides that, he's just doesn't do much, man.
Yeah, exactly. Jing Wei, I would say A. Can be picked in a lot of scenarios and never feel like absolutely horrible, but crit isn't really the meta right now, and crit's usually good on Jing Wei. She's okay with a kin size build, don't get me wrong, but she usually wants to go crit. I think she can always be played just because she's such a safe character. Her passive gets a ton of value because if you kill her, she can not really lose out on farm and kind of just be safe. Can be punished though because her early game is really weak and doesn't get a ton of pressure. So that's a bad thing about her. And that's probably why she's an A instead of like A+. But pretty good into Thorns as well because she can ult away and run away and all that. But I would say probably around A. Maybe you could argue she's a little bit higher just because she's probably not on the same level as like a Hou Yi. She's probably a little bit more valuable than a Hou Yi just because she's so safe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Jing Wei is probably A+. If she's not A+, she's just really high A. She's relatively safe in lane, but she's also kind of not safe. Like if you're against a lane bully, you will like get punished for picking Jing Wei. But her late games obviously extremely good. She's got built-in crit, which is kind of like burst objectives down. If you have any other crit in your build, you can kind of guarantee like 3 big autos that are good at dealing damage because of crits. Besides that, I don't know. She's just like a solid character. She's got like 40 different stems that increase her attack speed, her movement speed, her damage, her everything. Her ult's pretty safe to get away from divers, which means she's also okay into thorns. And I think she's just an all-around solid character. She's got good build paths right now. And she's just good. I'd say she's A-, maybe low A+, but you can probably leave her where she's at right now.
She's just she's in this spot where she's probably more valuable than like Anhur or Hou Yi or like Cherno or Chiron, but she's not as valuable as like a Haim. We can agree there. Jorm, this one's pretty easy for me. I think he's probably around B. Just a counter pick. Is still really good at getting pressure in solo and doing totems, but very easy to play around in team fights. Kind of one-dimensional because once you use your ultimate, you're really not going to be doing all that much. So you better be getting value out of it. And is the nerfs to him, the nerf to his basic attack damage, whatever you consider his basic attack, his breath, was actually a pretty big deal. Definitely reduced a lot of his damage throughout the laning phase. And is also pretty bad into a lot of the meta soul laners right now. Not good into Guan, not good into Nike, not really even good into Arthur. That was a matchup people thought was good, but it's definitely not that great, especially with Gaia being the purchase now. Jorm will always be proccing that. So all in all, can be played if you really need a Guardian solo. And he can be both like a little bit damaging and be kind of valuable with that. But for the most part, I would avoid him.
Yeah, I think Jorm was valuable at one point, but went through a series of nerfs. And I think he is a good totem getter, like a totem bot, but don't know how valuable that is if you're just going to be like a weaker character come mid-late game.
Exactly. I think that's the meta for solos, is to be strong in the mid to late game.
Yeah, I also think he's pretty shit with Thorns. Well,
Yeah.
not terrible, but like you want to like Thorns before you get your ult off, but you also want to get your ult off before you die, right? So that dynamic in itself is extremely difficult to perfect and like do well. I think if Thorns wasn't in the meta and you kind of needed a Guardian and solo for whatever reason, you could pick him. But he's not the best team fighter. He gets blown up before he goes down to his ult, and he just kind of is like, eh. So
yeah,
I'd say solid B tier.
Another big thing about him is he's not the worst with Thorns just because he can go pen and it will make his Thorns more valuable. But I think the worst part is that he's really bad with Blink, because if he blinks in, he has no instant form of CC to really threaten anybody. And Blink is a very, very valuable relic for a frontliner to initiate. And if you do go blink on Jorm, you're kind of just blinking in and going like, all right, let me start, like, I'll throw my one on you and stuff. But during that like process, people can just start hitting you and you're not really going to be doing all that much. So kind of just bad for that reason. I would say going on to Kali. Kali probably around B tier. I just think her early game's really bad. And her payoff late game is there, but that's why she's B, more of a counter pick. And if you can get to the late game, she will see a lot of value. Does get owned a little bit by upgraded shell, not as much as other auto attack characters, just because her hit chain is so fast and you go so much attack speed that you kind of shred through it pretty fast. But a well-timed shell can screw up you diving, and that's a really big deal because you really want to get that guaranteed first kill so you can reset your passive and keep going. More of a counter pick, and I would say isn't picked all that, especially in ranked, considering this is a ranked tier list as well. She's bad early game. She's not going to gank and get a bunch of kills and snowball the game. So for that reason, a lot of more junglers that are valuable than her.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you said. She doesn't have like crazy ganks, so you don't really have to worry about a Kali early game. And playing for late game is not that realistic in ranked games where there's like 30 kills in 20 minutes. So
yeah.
She's not going to be that useful or as useful as other junglers that are running around getting kills left and right. Also, her like when her ult is down, she feels really bad, like really, really bad, because you just can't really get in there, right? Like you can't like
blink and ult really
on people. Yeah, blink and ult because you're not going to jump in as a Kali. Well, for the most part, you're not going to be jumping in as a Kali. And I don't know, she just feels like pretty lackluster, but there are
beats
like,
too.
Her pop. Yeah, I mean, she kind of is just an active / ult bot. For the most part, like if you don't have your actives or your ult, you're going to be feeling extremely useless. Mm-hmm. But there is some times where like you see crazy Kali pop-offs that are getting like 2, 3, 4 kills and team fights 5 kills sometimes, using that ultimate to just like go completely ham and be untouchable. But I think she just doesn't do that much with shell in the game, with a lot of stuns in the meta, just like crazy CC that can kind of lock her down in her ultimate, that she's just like, she's just all right.
Yeah. Whenever you buy anti-heal against Kali, the value that she brings is that she is always going to maybe one for one somebody, because if you have anti-heal and she gets a reset on her ult, she's not even healing, so she's just going to die immediately after her ult. So she's basically just like a suicide bomber. She's just going to get in there and really try and kill one person, and with upgraded shell, with like picking the right characters into her, you're never like, or you're not, it's not that you're never, but a lot of times you're just not even going to even die in that scenario. So it's like, okay, well, what's the point of playing this? Moving on to Khepri, just a pretty good support. I would say he's A. Can be picked in a lot of scenarios. He's always good at killing frontline because his pull doesn't DR, and it's really good at just, CC chaining somebody and getting the kills. Pretty nice and ranked because if you're like feeling like you need to play a supporting character, like somebody that actually helps their teammates, your ult will always get a lot of value. Maybe, save some people and when they're out of position and stuff like that. But, isn't gonna hard carry a game. Can't really buy Thorns. He's not gonna be diving with Thorns, so it isn't as valuable as some other characters that can. And just a pretty balanced character. Pick him in a lot of scenarios. That's why he's A.
Yeah, I think if you make good use of his ultimate and his ability to peel, and you're, drafting him in a comp where you're just peeling extremely hard for like hard dive, then you're gonna be feeling really good. But if you're not like doing exactly that, you're not gonna be feeling that good. So I'd say A. You can pick him in some scenarios and feel really good. And you can kind of blind pick him into some things and feel all right. So that probably puts him above B, but I don't think he's like too insane or anything.
Yep, agreed. Arthur is up next. I would put Arthur probably S, maybe A+, but probably say S just because in ranked he can kind of win every single lane and always be good in team fights, especially with the changes to Glad Shield. I think considering Glad Shield, after playing with Glad Shield a lot more, I think that it's actually really viable on him and it's pretty nice. So I would probably put him in S just because he's probably on like the same level as Cthulhu, just one of the better solo laners in the entire game. The only problem with Arthur is that he's just a solo laner. That's the only thing he can be played in. He's not really viable in any other role, so pretty obvious where he's going once he's picked, so you can always try and counterpick him for that reason. But gets a lot of value into a lot of the meta picks and is very, very hard to not do much on. Like he's never going to lose lane, and he's also never going to like be useless in a fight unless you're really bad at the character, but you know that's not what we're considering, you know. So
yeah, I think Arthur's just so hard to team fight against when he's ahead, man. Like 6 abilities, 2 ultimates that do different things, but do like both those things extremely well. Hard to lock down, just an overall like straight beast in team fights. And I think if you're a good Arthur and you rotate at good times, then you are just going to be feeling great on that character. So I think he's definitely us.
Yep. Kukulkan, C tier probably. I'd say C. Pretty easy to dive. He has an ability. You throw it out. I know we keep talking about it, but it's really important in the meta. If you throw it out and somebody walks into it and thorns it, you're like, oh, I'm just going to take some damage. Don't really have a choice, and that's always going to feel bad for characters. And it is a pretty big deal. Ultimate's pretty hard to hit. It's good around objectives for securing. That's probably the most value you'll get from it, and maybe occasionally hitting 1 or 2 people with it in a team fight. If you hit multiple, like if you hit 3 or 4, then you're probably winning the fight. But that's going to be a lot more. That's going to be a lot rarer. Yeah, I think it probably his best ability is his 2, but that recently got nerfed as well, and you know, overall, just kind of not going to be played over any other mage now that he's been nerfed, and Thorns is pretty meta and stuff.
His best ability is his 1. You max it.
Yeah, that is true. His 1 is pretty good.
Ones, you max it and you spam your 1s, and they're like little mini like missiles that are just like, and they just smack somebody
with poly.
Yeah, with poly, you poly 1, that's the combo. You can even miss the 1 and hit the poly late game. But getting to late game with that character is obviously pretty dang difficult because he just kind of doesn't really do anything early. Well, not doesn't do anything, but he's easy to dive if you play on his ulti. He has no CC immunity. He has no like crazy mobility, especially because his 2 is nerfed, like you said. Also, his ult is pretty easy to thorn, so
that too, yeah.
Like, ideally, drop a 3-4 in a team fight. You're like, oh, I'm gonna hit a carry, and there's the thorns are in your way, and he thorns your ult and your 3. I'm pretty sure you do just like die. So
definitely, yeah.
That is not a good thing.
Yep.
And I think he's just weak all around. He's not like a mage that you want to be playing that often, but I guess in some scenarios like that apply for the other mages that you maybe do like a huge burst comp or something and you use his pressure to snowball, sure, but he's just like just very, very mediocre and pretty hard to pick and fit in comps.
Kumba, I have so much bias. I hate Kumba so much. I think he's arguably one of the worst characters in the game, at least bottom 5. He's so easy to play around. I think a lot of people, the only reason I wouldn't put him in D tier is because I think a lot of people, especially people watching right now, or people that just like play from like bronze to maybe even like plat level, think that the character is good because he has so much CC. But his CC is really, really easy to play around, and he does not do nearly enough. Like, he doesn't do nearly as much as a character that has Blink and Thorns. He doesn't do nearly enough as a character that has more CC or more damage. Maybe not more CC, but more reliable CC that actually has an impact. And his 2 is pretty hard to get off, pretty easy to interrupt. His 3 is interrupted after somebody does damage to it because it's just a mez. I mean, his ult is pretty good at like peeling, but I just think that the character is way too easy to play around if you know at least a little bit of what you're doing, you know. So, in my opinion, I would put him in D, but since we're considering most of ranked, we'll probably put him in C.
Yeah, I think his abilities having really long windups as well is pretty bad for the character. Just like his 2 and his 3 and his 4. And besides that, you don't really get too much value out of his 1. So
yeah, his one is so useless in a team fight.
He kind of just like can be a beast peeler, but can also do absolutely 0 in team fights. He's pretty inconsistent. He doesn't have like a crazy lane or anything. And yeah, he's just like a very, very mediocre character that I don't think is picked very often, and for good reason.
Yeah. Like I said, I wish I should have put him in D tier. It's okay though. Kuzenbo did get nerfed just because he was popping off so much, but honestly, the character's still probably S tier. Like, you could play him in support and solo, go blink thorns and just dive your heart out, hold W, click all your buttons, really in a random order. It doesn't really matter. And get a ton of value every time and be very hard to kill. I honestly think the character probably is S tier, even with the nerfs and even with everything going on. He can get a ton of kills in lane because of his early pressure with his push through the wave, and is also just really good late game. Very hard to kill. Gets a ton of value with thorns, and can go like Pridwin and ult people and just dive forever. So
yeah, I think Kuzenbo is just one of those like straight up anti-ADCs, like anti-ADC characters that it's just extremely difficult to play around because you don't know when you're supposed to be hitting into the character, and you don't know like when you're not supposed to be, because at any moment he could pop his 2 and his 4, and then he can also solo you, and it's just like pretty damn difficult to be extremely useful as a character. Whereas like a hunter player or like carry player, yeah, I don't know. He's just all right. He's got good lane pressure because his 3 is kind of nuts and kind of just one shots. He's got good team fight presence. He's got decent objective zoning and whatnot. And he's really good at thorns. And I feel like the common denominator is if you're good at thorns, you're probably just a good character. And he is just thorns users. So yeah.
And the reason I think he maybe is just a little bit better than A+ is that you could pick him in every single game and never feel that bad, unless they just go like 5 assassins and just ignore you the entire time. But that's not going to happen, you know. So he can be first picked, he can be second picked, third, he can be counter picked. Doesn't really matter. He'll always be pretty valuable, and you can never really counter pick him because there's not really anything to do against him besides maybe try and ignore him. Loki, hard to say because he hasn't been available in ranked or SPL yet. So for that reason, maybe we don't even consider him. But if I were to guess, just for fun, I think the character is probably B tier. I think that he's more valuable and viable than he was before, just because I think he can be built in several different ways, can be more of an initiator. His ultimate's a little bit better in my opinion. His early game isn't as bad. He can actually trade with soul laners because his clear isn't that bad anymore, and his like fight potential is not that bad. But is just going to be more of a counter pick, just because I don't see him doing enough damage and having enough utility to just be like that character that's just going to pop off in fights and stuff. So
yeah, I haven't really played. I don't think I've actually played a single game against Loki or like new Loki.
Yeah, he hasn't been.
He'll probably have the same issues he's had before. It's just like not being the best team fighter and not really doing much. But I guess I think you've definitely played him more than I have. So we kind of just have to go off of your word here. But I think he's definitely still going to be pretty low tier, not like anything crazy since his rework.
Yeah, I actually like his rework. Even in like balance aside, I think he's actually kind of fun to play. I think people are hating on him a little bit too much, but Medusa, I would say probably B, teetering on C tier. Her dash is very, very easy to block, so she's very unsafe. I mean, I guess does a lot of damage with their Viper Shot ever since they buffed it and made it 4 hits, but it's really not that big of a deal. And her ultimate can, there's always the chance where you turn a corner with it and hit 3 or 4 people and get a huge stun, huge damage. I mean, for example, if you look at the Panda Cat clip in season 3, season 2, whenever you popped off with that and hit like 4 people or whatever it was and completely changed the team fight, that was sick. But for the most part, these days, people don't really get hit by it as much. And, I would just say in general, pretty easy to play it around, she kind of requires other people to mess up for her to get a ton of value. So
yeah, I think one of her biggest issues, besides the fact that she's also not good into thorns, which is just bad because a lot of the hunters that aren't even good right now are also bad into thorns. So even if they were good, they probably wouldn't be as good as people would make them out to be. Her dash being like the size it is and the consistency of it being canceled when you're trying to get out is such a detriment to the character that I don't know if that character will ever be like, oh, just give me Medusa here until that's fixed. Because the second you get blinked on and then you're like, oh, I could just dash away, and then that dash gets eaten, you're just like, oh, well,
yeah,
I'm dead now.
It's also really weird. Her anti-heal is really good, but in a vacuum, her anti-heal is really good, but it's on her dash. So whenever you use her dash aggressively like that, you're basically asking to be killed. And anti-heal for an ADC is actually really valuable in my opinion. But if it's just that it's on her 3, like if it was on her 1 or her 2, I think the character would be a little bit more viable and kind of be nice into like healing comps and stuff like that. But you're basically saying, hey, pick ADC Medusa and dash into people in team fights so that we can use your anti-heal, but that's just never going to happen, So In lane, maybe it's good for the 1v1, but it's just never going to be useful in team fights. So I would say maybe you want to put her in C. I think maybe C is probably the better spot for her.
Yeah, I don't think she's. Where'd you have her before? B?
Yeah, I had her in B, but she's probably C, right?
Yeah, she's probably C. She's really not that good. Not all that.
Yeah, Mercury, my opinion, B. And I think the main reason is upgraded shell. You know, if you go crit, which is like the most viable build on Mercury, if you ult into a team fight and somebody upgrades shells and your first 2 autos are blocked, like Mercury's entire value is just trying to one-shot somebody or 2-shot somebody, you know, ult in, hit 2 autos and basically, you know, they're dead. But if they have upgraded shell, then goodbye, you know, like your entire value is gone in a team fight. He still has that early to mid game potential where he can lane gank and get a lot of like snowball potential, get his lanes ahead. So that's why I would put him in B. But the payoff isn't there anymore late game just because of upgraded shell and basically that alone.
Yeah, I think I've never been like a big Mercury lover. I don't think he's like crazy valuable. And especially now with shell being as good as it is and like hunters and mages actually just buying it. I feel like before, like a year ago, if you saw a mage have like a shell on them, they'd be like, dude, what the hell is that guy doing? But now you see more and more carries picking it up, and well, like carry players, not just hunters. And that definitely neutralizes a lot of what that character was even good at in the first place. He doesn't have like that great of a side lane gank. Like it should be okay, but it's really not like anything crazy. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think he's good. You also need crit for that character to be good, and you can't really crit thorns.
Yeah, he has one build path in the jungle, so
yeah.
Yeah, Thorns is another thing. He just one-shots himself with crit, so... Yeah, so if you decide to go on their carries, they have upgraded shell for you. It's hard for you to kill them. They'll just out-trade you. If you decide to go on their front line, they'll Thorns you and you'll just die. So come mid to late game, you pretty much are useless. You should maybe try and split push. So then he just becomes a split push bot, and that's why he's B. And some people are like, oh, this character below, like, the character's an A. But honestly, yes, it's because shell and Thorns, and the character gets no value. Merlin, I would say probably A. His late game payoff is really, really strong, but his early game isn't that strong, so you have to get there. Can be played in a decent amount of scenarios, and you'll feel pretty good about it. Still really good around objectives. I would say still relatively safe in a ranked scenario. In SPL, he's maybe not as safe just because there's a coordinated dive on him with Thorns and stuff. He does have some abilities that you throw it out there and it gets Thorns, it's going to feel really bad for you. But at the end of the day, I think that his value, just because he does so much damage and has so much outplay potential with his ultimate, and when he's getting dove, that he'll be pretty valuable. So I would say that he's A.
Yeah, I think it takes quite a while for Merlin to get his damage online, and I think he is pretty easy to dive now because he doesn't just like straight up insta kill you from levels like 10 to 15. Come late game, he will just like pop on anybody and kind of just farm everything in his sight. But getting there is not that easy, especially in ranked where there's no coordination, nobody's helping you. You're kind of just like out there floating on an island in mid, farming some camps, and then the second you have 3 people on you, you're just like, well, unfortunate. I think he's also not really great to Thorns, right? Because most of his stances are
it's not
damage that like he shoots out right away. So if you get Thorns on when you just popped your like stance switch into your purple combo off of an ice combo, or vice versa, then you're just not going to be like feeling great. But if you get late game, you do just kind of pop off. Just getting there is an issue.
Yeah. The only difference between him and other characters, like people are probably thinking, oh, well, doesn't Merlin get owned by Thorns? Shouldn't he be lower? The problem, or not the problem, but the difference between him and other characters is that he can still hit the carries with a lot of his abilities because they go through walls and are really long range, like his purple 1 and 2 specifically. If he hits a perfect, well, not even need a perfect, but a pretty good purple 1-2 combo, arcane combo in a team fight, and then gets dove and like gets Thorns on, he's still going to get a lot of value versus all these other characters that are a lot closer range and don't get as much value and can't hit like multiple people with their abilities and stuff like that. So although he does get owned by Thorns, it's just not as bad for him because he can still get a lot of value with his stance change and hitting multiple people with his AoE abilities. Mulan, I think Mulan's actually pretty sick, and especially in ranked. She can be played in support and solo, and I think she's really, really strong in the support role. Think underrated by a lot of people. Really good with Blink and Thorns. Really good in lane. Can get a lot of kill potential in lane and can snowball games for that reason. Obviously still has the downside in her ultimate where she's pretty easy to just like go on and kill because she kind of just sits there and is like, hey, hit me. If you Thorns before your ult though, you get some value out of that. So in my opinion, she's A+, but maybe we should put her in A just because I think in general, maybe not as, people don't see her like that.
Yeah, I think, like, if you can get double aggressive relics on her, like Blink Thorns, that god kind of just farms carries super hard. But her ult is still, like, kind of, like, weird, because if you're not really far ahead and then doing a million damage with the ultimate, and you ult through a team, and then you're just stuck standing there and get, like, hit by a couple mage abilities or something, like 10 Hunter autos in a row, you're just dead.
Yeah.
But if you're getting good value out of her, like, ult, and then you're Thornsing a bunch of damage and kind of just shitting on backliners, you're going to feel great. She also has a really strong laning phase if you want to use her in support, just because she's just a warrior and she does good base damage. And she's just a solid character. I'm surprised we don't see more Mulan anywhere, actually. But, yeah.
Neith did get buffed recently, and I think actually kind of helped her a lot. Attack speed steroid on her 2 is pretty good now. 1v1 potential for that reason because she steals the attack speed is really good. Her ult can get a lot of value in the mid to late game, or the early to mid game rather, and can be played in mid and in ADC, but probably more viable in mid just because a little bit safer there and can kind of like, decide where to impact the side lanes with her ult. But still has the problem where her backflip isn't really that good of an ability, can kind of telegraph that and dive her for that reason, and doesn't have the same hyper carry potential as other ADCs. But, maybe has the upside with her ultimate and stuff like that to make her a little bit more valuable. So I'd probably put her in A, maybe B.
Yeah, I think I personally think Neith is actually pretty dang good. She's got the ult, obviously, that you can use extremely easily to like set up side lane ganks and whatnot, or like mid lane ganks, obviously, if you're a side laner. She's actually relatively hard to 1v1 now with her stim change, or like with her stim being added to her too. She's actually a pretty good boxer, which was the thing she lacked before. She still has the same problems with having no CC immunity, and her backflip is still pretty telegraphed and where you're going to go and whatnot. It is faster, but still got the same issues for when you're being dove. And I think that character is actually pretty solid. I think she would actually be played if the top hunters weren't who they were, because she does have quite a hard time to them. But besides that, I think she's a pretty good character. I'd argue she's definitely a tier, yeah. Anybody were to say she's not.
Nemesis, even after her nerfs, or a nerf maybe? I don't really know. I think it was just one nerf. I think the character is S. The reason for that is you could top pick her in every single ranked game, and maybe not in every SPL game because there's more counterplay, but you can top pick her very often and always get a ton of value. Very, very hard to 1v1. Really good with the build path that you can go. She has a lot of options. She's one of those characters, in my opinion, that you can kind of just click damage items and maybe some bruiser items and always just like kind of be okay with it. Another character like that is Neja, in my opinion. And yeah, I just think that probably S tier just because it can be picked in pretty much every game and always get value, and is very hard to deal with as a diver. Very hard to kill.
Yeah, I agree. She also just like hard farms most of the meta hunters right now because you can't really get away from the character.
We just said Nemesis is in a better tier than Bacchus. Are you trolling? What? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with him. Actually, Nemesis. No, I think that character is extremely hard to deal with as a carry because you can't really outbox her. She steals all your power, or power with her passive, not all your power. She's also really good at doing objectives. If you do like a build path that Sino's been opting for on the SPL, where you're going stone cutting and then executioner, he's been loving doing that. And that is actually really good objective shred. On top of that, it's really good tank shred, which her kit allows her to do with her ultimate. And it's also really good against ADCs, which just kind of means she does it all as a jungler. I think the only problem is she doesn't have like the best early game issue, but even then it's like fine, I think. And she's kind of just nuts. And if you have a good Nem into a good comp and you're executing your ults well off of like good CC combos with your front line or your diver, if you're diving back line, then you're just going to be feeling really good. So yeah, I think she is rightfully so S or maybe A+, I guess, but I think she probably is just good enough to be S.
Yeah. Neja, probably around B. I don't know. He's gotten some nerfs over the years, and he also is pretty easy to play around with his ult. Like, you're kind of all in on your ult. If you don't hit it in a late game scenario, you're going to be really, really useless. If you do hit it, you're still not like it's not going to feel amazing because, there's like 3 or 4 seconds where people get to decide how they're going to play when you land and like decide what to do, how to peel, if they're going to Guan Yu, like who's doing what. Maybe they're going to zone out the people who are falling up on the damage and stuff like that. So even then, it's not like you're getting a ton of value out of his ultimate. Does have pretty good early clear potential and gank potential, but I don't really see the reason to play this character. I think he's pretty bad, and I'm like teetering towards putting him to C, but just because he can maybe snowball some ranked games with his early gank potential, I put him in B.
Yeah, I think most people by this point in their Smite careers are conditioned around Najol being a thing and can react to it in time for the most part. Sometimes it does just go off and you're not quick enough. The window of opportunity for you to be is just like, it's not like that big of a window where you're like, oh, every single time you should be beating it, but you should be quick enough to actually get it off before she does ult you or as she's ulting you. I think she's also a lot of value because she's gotten nerfs quite a few times and she's just like pretty easy to play around. Like she sashes you and then can only do like 1 or 2 things after that. She can kind of beat you or bait your beats or just ult right after. And if she doesn't get her ult off, she's kind of just useless.
Yeah, she for sure. Nike. Nike up next. I think Nike's probably A+. She's actually a really good flex pick. Can be played solo, jungle, and support. Does get hard countered by Sunder, but the only problem with Sunder on her is that, first of all, in ranked, people don't even buy Sunder a lot of the time because they don't realize. But also, it's kind of hard to actually use it on her in a team fight when she's diving. And a lot of the times, it's like maybe sometimes you'll even miss it, because she's like being really slippery and making it hard for you to hit it. And also just because of like the meta, people want to be diving a lot of the time, so the support maybe is not even going to want to buy the relic to use it on her, so it's really hard to have it for her. So she still gets a lot of value, but she still has like 2 channeled abilities that can be interrupted, so she can be bullied in lane when those abilities are interrupted, and can kind of be ignored. If you're able to prevent her getting value from her thorns, then she can be ignored in a team fight, just because the only way she can ever really kill you is with thorns.
Yeah, I think Nike is just really good at like fucking with backliners because of her too, obviously. Absorbing auto attacks and being super annoying to play into. And her ultimate making her kind of like this huge, unkillable, like just machine in front of you. She's got a lot of base damage, which means she doesn't actually need like that much power in her build to kind of pop you mid and early game. And her like rotations to team fights are pretty hard to deal with as a squishy.
Yeah.
On top of that, she's obviously extremely good at thorns because she is one of those characters that can just kill you if you don't hit her into the thorns or don't hit into her thorns. You can't really run away from her. She has that huge slow in her ultimate. She can knock you back. She can knock you away from doing damage. She can knock you into her team. She's got good displacement. She's hard to lock down. She is just an overall great character. And I think, she is just a beast of a character. Especially if she gets to like mid late game without being super punished, then you should just be feeling good playing that guy.
Yep, agreed. Nox. C tier. Just I don't know. Pretty easy to play around. She does 4 speeds if you can hit her 2-1 combo, but it's pretty hard to hit. I would actually say her probably most viable role is support for the most part, just because she can be very, very like annoying to backliners where she just sits there and peels for her teammates. Maybe uses some defensive relics on them, then silences the person diving, cripples them with their one. And can be kind of annoying for that. In mid, it doesn't get as much value and kind of is another character that throws out an ability, and if he thorns it, does a decent amount of damage to herself actually, and she can't really take it back, so not very good for her in mid. Same thing with her ultimate. You can thorns that and get some value out of it, but just kind of a character that just doesn't, even if you play her perfectly and hit every 2-1 combo, it just doesn't have as much payoff as other characters. Can't use her abilities over walls, which is a really big deal, and I would say just kind of bad.
Yeah, I think if you like, on the off chance you're getting consistently hit by Nox 2-1s, I'm sure you won't feel great. But you can also just kind of beads them and go ham as like a diver or frontliner or even a backliner. Also, if you're playing her support, her damage isn't as threatening as if she was full damage, obviously.
Yeah.
So you can kind of just hit her while she's 2-1ing you, right? It doesn't take away like your auto attacks or anything. So you can just be hitting her the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
As a mage, you'll feel a little worse, but like in general, she's not like that threatening. Also, she's not a good thornser.
Yeah,
in fact,
that's true.
kind of absolutely useless with thorns. So yeah, I don't think she's anything crazy in particular. So I'd say C, probably for sure. Probably for sure. Kind of doesn't make any sense, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Nuwa, this is pretty interesting. I think probably Nuwa's probably just A, and her early game is bad, so that's not going to be good for ranked. But what would be good for ranked is that she's a character that will get a lot of value by not having any team coordination whatsoever. If she just gets to a scenario late game where she's getting dove and she has thorns, if she just clicks 4 and has a lot of damage items built, she'll always get value in a team fight. So for that reason, regardless of like how bad her early game is and how bad like maybe maybe she would be into like people diving her in thorns, she can always click 4 and kind of do some work. So I would say she's probably around A, maybe B.
Yeah, I'd say she's probably B over A because she is kind of one of those niche picks where you're not just gonna be like, oh, just give me Nuwa here, top 3, just give me.
Yeah,
Nuwa.
you don't want to top. Yeah.
But if you pick her into a good comp where their dive isn't super insane and they don't have like great characters against new alt, then you will be feeling pretty damn good if the game goes late. But besides that, I mean, she's got good objective burst, which is kind of troll because you don't really see her being used for that too often. Her minions are really good for if you have a magical guardian that's also doing a lot of damage. For instance, if you have like a new Cerberus, you have double shred on your 2s. Like you'll basically just do true damage, and that applies for objectives as well. And I think she's okay, but just kind of niche and can be played sometimes, but not that great of a character.
Yeah, a bit more counter pick. Odin when he got reworked, he was ridiculous, but they nerfed him a ton. I think recently he saw a little bit of buffs just so they can try and bring him back a little bit. But I would say he's still probably B tier, more of a counter pick. Does get a lot of value into a lot of meta picks, actually. I mean, if you just look at the S tier right now, not a single one of these characters can get out of his cage without blinking. So that's kind of the reason you would want to pick him, but he's still a counter pick for that reason. And his cooldowns are still pretty long on his 1, 2, and his 3, so pretty hard to be a nuisance in the early to mid game just because of those long cooldowns. And I would say even with his cage getting some value, you can always go Phantom. You can always auto attack and get out of it, and that'll be kind of frustrating for him. So I would say probably B tier.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. I think he is okay if you're picking him into like the best comp for yourself, but in general, the god feels kind of lackluster to play with and against. And the fact that you can kind of break out of the cage now also is a big deal. Like before, if you got like really good cages, you can actually just kill the people in there because they were stuck to run around. But now in like team fights, if you're coordinating with your other backliner and you're the backliner getting caged, it takes like a second and a half to get out of the wall if you just hit the same wall with like a high attack speed hunter and then somebody who's paying attention as a mage.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's okay if you just pick him into gods that have dashes and not jumps. So.
Olaran got nerfed. Rings got nerfed. All pretty bad for him. He went from an S tier character to a relatively mediocre character, but I would probably put him in A just because he's still one of those characters that like he's kind of like a B tier character where you want to pick him in the right scenario. You can't just pick him every game and feel amazing just because he can get dove really, really hard, not that great into thorns, and also there's a lot of characters right now that do really well into him that have long CC immunities like Guan, Kuzumbo, and stuff like that, Cthulhu. But if you do pick him in the right scenarios, his payoff is a lot better than I think a lot of these B tier characters. So for that reason, I'd probably have him in A. But keep in mind that he's not like a lot of these other A tier characters where you can pick him in every scenario and feel good. He does have a good payoff though.
Yeah, I think I don't know where I'd personally put him. It would be between A and B. But that character like sometimes just feels super insane and then sometimes just feels super not insane just because he's really easy to dive.
Yeah.
And if you like bait out his ultimate,
thank you so much, Sir Daddy. I appreciate it,
just
bro.
like
Love ya.
Just some auto attacker that doesn't actually do like anything super crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he's A, maybe like A minus or B plus if those were choices. But yeah, if you pick him into a good comp and utilize his ability to like zone out entire areas and have like pretty decent auto attack damage as a mage and have like another decent auto attacker in ADC, they can be hard to work against, but he's kind of just like in my opinion. So yeah, probably A, maybe B.
Yeah, Osiris probably A tier. He did get buff recently, and the reason I put him in A is that I think you could, in ranked and maybe even SPL, you could pick him in every single game and just be like, yep, I'm doing at least a little bit of work. Like, I'm kind of winning lane. I'm kind of doing some value in team fights with my thorns and diving, and I'm at least doing it a little bit, being a little bit tanky. And doesn't have as much of a payoff as I think these other characters, these other warriors and guardians, but maybe can be played a little bit more and never feel absolutely awful about it. Does have some counter matchups and can kind of be a flex. You could play him in jungle if you really want to. I don't think he's very good there, but I would just say after his buffs, he's just like an A tier god, you know, just can be played.
Yeah, I think the ult change on Osiris was probably pretty nice for him because he can actually kind of close distances now on gods that have jumps and whatnot. But for the most part, he's pretty much just like a mitigation bot. He kind of just absorbs a bunch of damage and tries to return as much as he can. Maybe like if you're like Sino and you play him in the jungle, then it's a little bit of a different dynamic. But for the most part, he's just like get in there, try to get a tether on as many people as you can, be a nuisance, try to just absorb a bunch of damage, and then ideally use thorns at the same time. And if you do your job well, then you should be able to just do decent work. But he's just like an ugly character. He's not like exceptionally good at anything. But
yeah, Pele up next. Pele's probably A tier. She gets owned by Shell. I mean, we always talk about like there's actives are actually dictating a lot of the meta right now, as you can probably tell by how we're talking about everything with like thorns and Shell and stuff like that. Her ult gets owned by Shell, but if Shell wasn't in the game, she'd probably be A plus or S tier, to be honest. But the reason I'd probably put her in A, maybe A plus, is because considering ranked, she can absolutely snowball ranked games. She is so good in the early to mid game. Very, very hard to out 1v1 her for one, but she's also really, really good at ganking, very good at punishing carries, punishing anybody on the map, really. Does a ton of damage and can kind of just run around the map with her extra movement speed from her 3 and hyper farm and do whatever. Very good at clearing jungle, so maybe we put her in A plus for that, just because ranked. But again, keep in mind, if you're watching this and you're just like, oh, I feel like Pele's just an absolute menace, it's probably because you're not buying upgraded Shell against her. Go to upgraded Shell and it'll be a lot worse.
Yeah, I think Pele's just really good at dealing with backliners. And that's a really good trait to have as a diver. So you're just going to be feeling okay, unless you have Shell. But I guess we'll just give her the benefit of the doubt and say that people aren't building shells. And if you're not into Shell as Pele, you're going to feel really good. You do 1 million damage. You have CC immunity. You can run people down. You can also just outrun people if you're being chased. Or if like a fight doesn't go too well and you take a bunch of damage, you have your 3 to kind of get on out of there. And the guy's good at snowballing and kind of just farms carries, especially in rank. So definitely say she's pretty high up.
Yeah, maybe would be S tier without Shell, just because she would be so good in ranked. Persephone up next. Seen a little bit less play of her, and maybe she's being let through in your ranked games. I think in a lot of levels of rank, she's actually let through a lot, just because people don't really know how to play her. But if you know how to play her, I think the character is still S tier. Very hard to dive as a frontliner, just because she gets a lot of value out of her ultimate, because you need CC immunity for it. Doesn't get as owned by thorns as some other mages. Can kind of decide whether or not to use abilities into thorns for the most part. So, you know, is maybe forces frontliners into beads a lot of the time. But in my opinion, I think the character is still very, very, very strong. Probably one of the top 3 mages in the game. And because of that, you can pick her in almost all scenarios, in ranked especially, and be good with her. So S tier for me.
Yeah, I think I was a mid laner at one point in time, and her damage is just...
good enough.
I feel like it's always surprising, man. I don't think there's a single player in the game, besides maybe like Paul or Shinto, but those are the extremes, who like know the character inside out, who can tank Pele damage and just be like, oh yeah, I probably knew I was going to take that much damage. Like, I feel like there's always team fights where you'll walk in as a frontliner or even a backliner, and she'll hit you with something, and you'll just be like, did I just get hit for that amount? Like, by that, whatever that ability is. Whether she like 2-1s you from a distance, or like a plant hits you and she 1s you. Like, dude, that character's damage is just always going to be really nuts, because otherwise she's not going to really I don't see a world where they nerf all her damage. She has a very valuable ult in team fights. Like you said, it does force many frontliners to go beads, or else they're just kind of trapped in the middle of a couple people hitting them. But I think she's marginally worse than she was at one point in time. She's been through a lot of nerfs, but I think she's still just a valuable character that can be picked pretty consistently, especially in ranked. If you're a good Pele or Persephone, you're just gonna farm everyone, man. So
yeah, maybe you could argue A plus, but I'm comfortable with her in S because why not? Poseidon's up next. I think Poseidon's probably just A. Kind of Poseidon's always good at cracking frontliners. That's really what he's good at. And Thorns is pretty good into that because he'll reflect a lot of that damage, so he's going to feel bad about that. But he's really good with the Doom Orb build right now. He's just a zoomer, basically. He can zoom around the map, can run away from frontliners diving him, which is really strong. And I would say he's just A tier, can be picked in a lot of scenarios. He's just one of those mages that's like, he's just like a bland pick that will sometimes get a lot of value, maybe sometimes won't get as much value, but can always just do a little bit, can kind of burn objectives, can kind of be good against dive. So probably just a pretty balanced mage in my opinion, probably A tier.
Yeah, I think Poseidon's definitely A. I don't think he's too insane or anything to like put him into A plus or S. And I think he does have times where he struggles quite a lot, especially if he's not. I feel like levels like 1 through 8, if you get a Poseidon who's like hyper farming and hasn't really been punished, you'll feel really good. But then there are games where he gets kind of shut down early or gets killed early, and then his damage from his Kraken burst becomes a lot less scary than it could have been. And that's when I feel like the god starts to lose a lot of value. But if you kind of just hyper farm and then play around like bursting tanks and bursting objectives with his ultimate and his 2, then you should be feeling pretty good with that character. I think he's overall a pretty balanced character right now in mid.
Speaking of bursting objectives and being good around objectives, Ra, I would put Ra in A+. He's very good around objectives now because of his 3. He can heal people tanking it. He can give them power to tank it. He can give them protections to tank it. And not only that, everybody's going to be full health, and by the time the objective is really low, he can always use his 1 ult combo to basically secure every objective on the map. Pretty hard to dive as well because you get prots in your 3, and if people go Lotus Crown, it's really, really hard to actually kill him with all of his movement speed and all of his protections that he's getting and the healing and all that. Does get owned by Cursed Donk just because you kind of, can throw out your 3 randomly and walk through it, and then all of a sudden Cursed Donk upgraded, going to be doing more damage, but still pretty safe. Can get a value in team fights because he doesn't really get owned by Thorns that much because he can ult onto a backliner, and because he's so good around objectives, he's just very good in SPL, but also, in ranked, I think you can kind of pick him in most scenarios and feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I think Ross kind of seen a resurgence in the meta. I think it's got a lot to do with Dumor being built and him having a speedy passive, making him very hard to lock down when those 2 things are put together.
Yeah, the slow immunity on his 2, recent buff as well.
Slow immunity is 2, passive movement speed when using abilities, which you're just doing, right? You're just going to be using abilities. And then the Dumor passive makes it very easy to start hyper farming, kind of like with Poseidon. His objective damage is obviously insane. You can do the 1-4 that could all last and kind of just burst objectives from like 2,000 HP, like mid-late game. His snipe cooldown's also like really, really short. So if you're accurate with it and you just consistently send out snipes and hit like mages and backliners or even supports come early game, you're going to get a lot of value out of that character. On top of that, it's very hard to dive because of his 3 granting protections and him being slippery. And I think he's really good at the Thorns. So
yeah, exactly.
All those things combined will make him.
Healers are generally pretty good into Thorns. Raijin up next. Probably, I think maybe a little bit underrated by people. He does get owned by, I would keep talking about it. He does get a little bit owned by Thorns just because, his only real strength is like killing the people diving him and like going into his ult and like maybe hitting the frontliners plus like 2 or 3 people maybe. But he's still going to get some value out of that. And if you're able to play him aggressively and jumping in on cooldown, maybe diving with like a full damage Raijin, maybe you could pop off with that. But, still going to get owned by Thorns, I think. So probably we'll just put him in B because I think maybe slightly underrated. But I think probably worse than a character like Merlin, Discordia, or Poseidon. Maybe all those characters are a little bit more viable than him just because he recently got nerfed. His level 5 kill potential is a lot worse now, though, as well, because they nerfed his ultimate. And before, he was just getting easy kills at level 5 with how much damage it did.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the assassins right now that are being played are also pretty damn good into Raijin. You see, like, Nems and stuff like that are obviously just going to hard farm Raijins because while he's channeling, they just get so much of their damage off.
Yeah.
I think his build path's like kind of weird because like he feels good with Dumor, but you also kind of want like Spear and Divine on him for the most part. So it's like kind of awkward to build him extremely well. And I don't know. I think he's an alright character, but he's definitely got some pretty obvious pretty obvious cons. He's very easy to dive now. His damage is nowhere near what it was at one point. He obviously, like you said, doesn't have a lot of level 5 kill potential, which I feel like was a big part of his kit and why he was so valuable early on, because you had to look out for that. And yeah, I think he's just like an god.
Yep. The opposite of that is Rama, who is probably S tier, maybe A plus. He did get nerfed, but I still think like his late game carry potential is insane. He's obviously really good in the meta right now. He can go up into his ult and just be, ignore frontliners for a little bit and get a lot of value diving the backline for his team. Is pretty good in lane just because he has he can chain slow people with his one, and obviously has really good wave clear with his one. So all in all, you can probably pick him in almost every game and get good value, especially in ranked. So I would say S, maybe A plus.
Yeah, I think Rama's S tier. Just I don't know if has there been like an ADC that got buffed like 4 times in a row and just been
I don't know.
Dude, that character Rama was just okay for a while. He was just an alright character, and then Harris is like, nah, we're just gonna buff him in 3 different parts of his kit, make him way better, and then they also changed the meta to be
Re-kit is passive too.
Change his passive. So basically 4 out of his 5 parts of his kit were changed. The meta is around Thorns and Hard Dive, which he's obviously very good against because he can go up in the air. His build path is literally perfect for him. The stars have kind of just aligned for the character, and I don't think I think it'll only get worse from here. I think the meta is going to change and he's going to become less viable. But the character's just so OP, man. He gets instant wave clear in duo. He's got really good matchups that were probably kind of bad before, but now they're just good because of how good of a character he is. And I don't know. I feel like all the cons of the character had were literally eliminated and they're just good. The character's just good now. Just really good.
Ratatasker, probably around A, possibly A plus, because he has really good early gank potential because he can buy his acorn out on the map, can snowball a lot of rank games for that reason. He's also kind of a flex because he can be played jungle, maybe solo, and maybe even support with some of his tank acorns. The problem I have with Rat, and the reason I don't really have much of an opinion on him, is I don't play him at all because he has a bug where when you buy his acorn, you drop frames. I don't know if they fixed it. I don't really care. The character's boring anyway, in my opinion. So, so I just think he's probably around A, but could argue maybe a little bit higher just because of his snowball potential.
Yeah, I think the only times I've thought Rat was kind of hard to deal with / feels like really good is when we played against that Renegades comp where they had double Rats with Morgan.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And I was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of hard to play against, but for the most part, he's pretty easy to predict where he wants to go and what he wants to do. I think most of the meta frontline or backliners are relatively good into Rat, so it makes him a lot less valuable. And I kind of think he's just an okay character. I think the only thing that's good about him is that if you play him in ranked, you can kind of snowball him with the acorn. If you get an early acorn and then get a couple early kills, you can snowball and then start just eliminating everything on the map. But if that's not happening, then he's just an god. Just an okay pick that can probably be picked pretty highly and do some work, but not super.
Robin, I kind of feel like the same way. Just a good character, a character that you could pick in almost every single game and do some amount of work. You'll get some value out of him, but he has some obvious downsides. I don't think he is gonna be an absolute menace in the early game, like a character like Pele would, or a character maybe like a Rat would. And also doesn't get as much value in the late game because he's good at diving, but kind of has to go all in and get all of his damage off and hopefully one shot somebody for the most part. But he's just a character that is kind of like all the other characters in A, where you could probably pick him every game and feel okay about it, but not gonna feel amazing in it in any way.
Yeah, I think Robin's great at blowing up characters that are backliners. I don't know why I worded that way, but if you get if you get your full kit off on Mage, they have pretty low base HP, so you pretty much do just one shot him. He doesn't have great objectives or anything, which is probably one of his bigger cons, that he can't really when you're doing golds and stuff, you feel kind of weird hitting it.
That's true, yeah.
It's nice that you can pseudo flex a character. He can go jungle, he can go solo, so that's kind of a perk. But in general, I think he's just all right. Like Alex said, he's good at diving. He's good at a couple things, and you can kind of pick him and be a Ravana one trick if you wanted to, and probably feel all right every game.
Exactly. You'll always feel all right on him for the most part. Still up next, probably B. Ultimate's really bad, pretty hard to hit unless you have like a really guaranteed lockdown. Even then, like a lot of people build CCR and stuff, so it's pretty hard to hit people with your ult off of CC. Her 1 and 2 in the mid to late game are very strong abilities, but I just feel like a character with only basically 3 abilities. Her 3 is a decent escape for the most part. Is not really going to be that valuable compared to other ones, and her early game is not very strong. So, she can't make up for not having an ultimate basically by having a strong early game because her early game is pretty weak. So, no real reason to play her over other mages. And maybe you could see her played into characters that have to sit still so that you can get guaranteed ultimates. Like you could see her maybe into Anubis. You could see her into maybe like a Kabrakan, or I don't know, maybe some of these other characters that, as a counter pick. So that for that reason, maybe B tier, but just not as valuable as other mages.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. She's got
it is going on
her
YouTube,
1 and her
guys.
2 that aren't the
This video
easiest
will be on
abilities
YouTube.
to land, but it's also like her damage sources, right? So if you miss those abilities, you're kind of feeling bad. Unless you're just blowing people up off of CC with Scylla ult, then a lot of the time when you're like running around in that ult, when you're looking for somebody to hit, people are just hitting you the whole time. And then for the most part, when you finally find that target, you kind of just get bursted as you're doing the animation. Her 3 is nice, but all in all, if you're kind of missing her 1-2s and you're kind of getting W keyed all the time, you're not going to be feeling too good. And I don't think she's a character that you can kind of just pick and be like, yeah, man, just give me Scylla here, and I'm going to pog off randomly. So
yeah,
I should put it lower on the list.
Doesn't get as owned by other characters with Thorns. Like she doesn't get owned by Thorns that hard, but she still gets, there's still like she throws out her 2, has to detonate it, or just won't use it, and then Thorns will get value. People can like walk into her ultimate with Thorns, which is kind of troll, but can work sometimes, which is really silly. But yeah, just don't think the character is amazing. Serket recently got buffed. I would say probably A+, maybe A. As you can see, a lot of these characters up here rely on sustain. There's a lot of healers that are meta, so Serket's always going to be good into that. And she was pretty bad before, but now after her buffs is a little bit more valuable. Kind of go a lot of different builds and see some value. Maybe I'll just put her in A. She's another character I think you could probably pick her in most games and kind of always do at least a little bit. Her early gank potential is really strong because she has a lot of CC and can set up for her laners, or maybe even just set up for herself and do a ton of damage. But probably A, maybe hovering towards A+, but probably just A.
Yeah, I think Serket's just a really
reduced the cooldown on her
slippery
too, as well. True story.
So she's kind of hard to lock down. So you'll see like good Serkets will go split push something, kind of run around, lurk in the jungle, and it makes her kind of hard to deal with, especially in like late game scenarios when you're doing fire giant dances and stuff like that. Makes the character a lot more valuable. Not that you're always picking her for that. You are picking Serket for, I think she's got really good early pressure, right? She's got a really good level 5, like a lot of opportunity to kill. And she's got 100% anti-heal, which means that she is really good into the top sustain characters.
Because they're saying 5% scaling is
20%. Hit all of your abilities
20%,
on carries, you're
20%
forcing
scaling
actions
on
a
her
lot, and are just kind of hard to deal with in general. So yeah, I think that character is really good, especially if you pick her into comps that you like kind of farm. You'll feel great.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on. Set, I think, is probably S. Maybe S+. He can be played in so many roles, and considering we're talking about ranked as well, I think he is probably one of, if not the best character in the game right now, where if you are trying to win a ranked game and you are trying to just have the most impact on the game and potentially hard carry the game, he's probably the best or one of the best characters for that. It's hard to argue anybody should be S+ right now because I don't think there's so many characters in the game that are just like absolutely broken that, it's just ridiculous ruining the game. That's kind of how I see S+. So maybe we say S for that reason, but what do you think? Do you think he's worth putting in S+?
I think if you factor ranked into it, yes.
That's what I'm thinking as well.
That guy just snowballs super hard. He's extremely hard to deal with, especially if you don't have like coordinated backliners and they're not coordinating shells or peeling for one another, then he will just like shred through everything. On top of that, you could probably pick Set in 4 of the 5 roles in the game, or you could probably play him support if you wanted to.
You could probably play him in every role, yeah.
And feel quite impactful. And I think he just kind of hard farms everything. And if I had to put my freaking life on the line and I had to win a rank game, I would probably pick Set and just kind of hard farm the game because that's what he's really good at. So, yeah. I think I mean, like you said, I don't quite know if I'd say S+, but I think just based off of ranked and how many times I've lost that character because he's extremely fed just to like random stuff, and I'd say it's probably S+.
Yeah. I think in high, like Grandmasters level ranked, you'll see him played, or you'll see him be let through a lot, and you may not, like, he may not get as much value just because I think really, really good players are a little bit better playing around him. But considering we're talking about all of ranked, I think, this is probably the best character in the game for just winning ranked games. And also, again, we're taking some SPL inspiration as well, and he has been played in the SPL quite a bit as well, and he's pretty good in the SPL as well. So, Scotty, pretty bad. I think you're better explaining why. I would say the character is probably C or B. What do you think? Probably B.
I think she's definitely leaning towards the B side of things because I don't know. Her early game's alright. You kind of want to go trans in the character to have like crazy burst damage with your dog and your one and whatnot, but that build pass quite a bit worse than the Devos build path. On top of that, she's obviously extremely easy to dive because she has no mobility unless you count like her movement speed increase under 3 mobility. A lot of the characters in the meta also kind of like, for instance, Rama kind of farms her dog, and that's kind of most of her damage. And Rama is obviously a really relevant pick right now. I don't know. I think she's just like a really hard character to play well, and even if you're playing her well, I feel like there's many times where you just get punished for being Scotty. And I feel like if that's the case, then the character just cannot be like great.
Yeah. Sobek? He's probably A. I think he's pretty bad in solo, but he's pretty good in support. Maybe he's A+ just because his support is pretty good. Can kind of pick him in every single game, right? And never feel bad. I think probably, at least in support, that is. So maybe A+. But he's probably A to A+, probably in that region where, gets a lot of value, has a lot of CC, good at killing people in lane with his pluck if you play it right. And, has that benefit. And doesn't really have a weak part of the game for the most part. So I would say maybe A+. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Sobek's all around a great character for displacement. And he's just a solid pick in general, in my opinion. He's just like really hard to play around because you can't really ever just kill a Sobek straight up. Like, oh, he went in, just kill him because he gets prots from his passive. He has healing, obviously, and then his ult makes him pretty hard to kill. He's got a lot of damage. He is also playable in a couple roles, so like support solo for the most part. You can play him ADC if you want, I guess. And he's a really good Thornzer because he kind of does a lot of damage that is, for the most part, unavoidable. So
Thorns go into his ult.
A pretty good character. Probably A+.
Not a good character is Soul. Soul is probably... Okay. If we were talking about like Grandmaster's level ranked, I would put her in D. But just because, I don't know, people are like, but I can lifesteal and I can kill towers and stuff. Like, maybe C or B for that reason. But the character is very, very, very easy to dive and play around. Does get owned by Thorns because kind of has to turn to do anything because her 3 really isn't that great of an escape. You can Thorns her ult damage and she's going to do a lot of damage to herself. You can kind of blink on this character and, you'll get a lot of damage on her if she doesn't instantly Aegis and go into her 3. And probably just also gets owned in lane, I would assume. Right, Max?
I think her lane is probably the strongest part of her kit. And even then, it's not that nuts. So that should speak for the character's viability. I don't know. She's just really, really bad, in my opinion. She's so hard to get a lot of damage off in team fights. Because the second you get gone on, you have to instantly 3, and then your 2 just doesn't do that much damage. Your ult is okay, but I don't know. She's really bad at getting dove. Her objective damage isn't that insane or anything. Her early game being great, the payoff isn't quite there because she's not really that great late. And I think she's just an overall extremely weak character that's really easy to punish and play against.
Yeah.
So
I think she's another character that's gotten owned a little bit by power creep, and also has she was one of those characters that was so broken when she was released and played so much and did so many things that they nerfed a lot of aspects to her kit. So now in this meta, or maybe not this meta, but in the time of the game where like there's characters that are being introduced that do so many things, and you know, some old characters are being buffed to do so many different things and be really good. She's kind of fallen behind quite a bit when it comes to just her overall value with what she brings, her damage, her utility, all that. So for that reason, probably just hovering around C tier. Wukong, actually pretty strong. I would put him in A+. Is definitely still a flex because I think he is viable and in jungle and in support, but the best role for him is definitely in solo. Really good with the Soul Eater build. Very, very hard to kill. When it comes to just like in lane, he's pretty safe, and ganking him, it's pretty hard. But also in team fights, if he usually goes beads and can go more damaging and kind of just own a backline with a beads and a blink. But that is a downside to him as well, because you don't go thorns with him because you're going more damage, so you want to be a little bit safer with something like beads. So that's a slight downside to him. But also, at the end of the day, can't really go wrong with him. Pretty strong. I wouldn't say he's like in this S tier or this S+ tier by any means, just because his lane isn't that great. You can kind of punish him and you know, own him when he just has Soul Eater not fully stacked and stuff like that. But for the most part, across all ranked games, you could probably pick him and do a lot of work in the team fights.
Yeah. I think Wukong is really good at killing backliners because you can kind of build him like a lot of warriors have to worry about getting killed by backliners, whereas Wukong is kind of hard to kill, right? Because he's got his forms, he's got his ultimate, he can kind of just range you and kind of play the slow game and kind of just whittle you down. And I think that makes him extremely valuable. He can kind of build full damage, which is also really nice because that means you have a little bit of extra damage in the dive. And he's an overall slippery character that does just a good bit of everything and is pretty powerful in my opinion. So
yeah, I don't know what you said. If you go beads on Wukong, most of the time, in order to kill a Soul Eater, for a mage has to have some form of CC to like hit all of their abilities. So if you go beads on Wukong and just go like sledge, you don't even need magical defense. You can just build physical defense and damage to kill the ADC. So then it's like the Wukong doesn't even have to build for the mage, and then he also is just building so much damage and so much defense for the ADC that it's very hard for the ADC to deal with him. Moving on to Susano. Susano's probably around A, just a pretty good jungler. I don't really see his downside apart from maybe his early game. You know, his early game isn't like the best ever. It's not going to be better than some other junglers, but his payoff late game is really good just because he doesn't get owned by Shell and he can kind of just one-shot people with his burst. But I wouldn't say that he is just like a end-all be-all like OP character. He's probably just around A. Could be picked in a lot of scenarios and probably feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I think Susano just kind of farms backliners like really, really hard because there's so much of his kit that you have to Aegis. So he can, like, if it's just a strict 1v1 and he gets to like get all of his burst off on you, you're just gonna die. You know what I mean? It's like even if you Aegis the one, he has the ult to hit you after. If you Aegis the ult and the one, miraculously, he's got a million auto cancels and just a bunch more damage coming at you. On top of that, in team fights in the jungle, that ult is like massive. It's extremely wide, and it covers a very big part of the jungle and most of the area that you're fighting in. Same thing applies to like lane fights. And he's pretty slippery as well, so it's hard to just like straight up lock down. And I think if you're a good Susano, you can kind of just farm with the character pretty consistently. And I think he's just like a pretty good pick. He's not insane, but he's pretty damn good. And if that character gets ahead, it's kind of just over for you, IMO.
Mm-hmm. 2 knockups, which is the best CC in the game as well. So pretty hard to play around that. Sylvanas, B tier. Maybe A. Maybe if there's a B+, he would be B+, because I think he's better than like Athena, Ares, because in ranked he can be pretty strong in lane pressure and just overall like snowballing the early game, because his early game is pretty strong, but pretty easy to just kill. And he doesn't really get a lot of value with thorns. Doesn't have enough base damage to just solo carries like some other guardians and warriors would, and kind of has, I think in my opinion, has a bit of a high skill ceiling, because you got to hit your poles a lot of the time. You also have to have really like well-timed and well-placed ultimates to get a ton of value out of his ult. And I would say he's B tier instead of A tier just because he's such an easy character to kill. It's so easy to just run on that guy and kill him, chop him down, you know?
Yeah. I think he's definitely B tier. I don't even think he's close to A tier in my opinion. Honestly, he's probably even closer to C tier than he is to A tier.
Oh my.
He kind of doesn't really offer anything anymore just because there's better like crutch pressure picks in duo now. And he just kind of doesn't really do anything. I mean, he's got a good ult. If you can get it off on like double carries and backliners, then you'll be feeling good. But for the most part, you're kind of just like a walk-in kill for carries and junglers. And I feel like you just, I don't know when you would pick Solanas over like Kepri or something like that, where you want lane pressure, but you also get more from it. So
yeah.
He also does nothing with thorns. So.
You guys need to stop trolling in chat. Yeah, 1 sec. Yeah, we're including rank 2, and also people saying Set solo isn't that good. It's not. Set can be played in 5 roles, basically. Okay, 4 roles for the most part, and he is really good in all of those roles. Maybe he's not the best character in all those roles, but he's really good in all those roles, and this is considering ranked. And, I mean, I think Max and I decided, and maybe you guys disagree, but this is our list, so shut the hell up. If I had needed to win one ranked game, and I needed to pick a character, Set's probably, right now, probably the best character in the game, in my opinion, for doing that. So, anyway, moving on. Terra's up next. Terra is actually getting buffed next patch, and I think it's actually going to make her more viable, but I don't think it's really going to be that crazy. Like, AoE autos is nice, and I think maybe it'll make her lane a little bit better intel and maybe support, make her level 2. Her level 1 and 2 are, like, probably the worst character in the game, level 1 and 2, just because she doesn't really do a whole lot, and it's basically just a stun or a dash or maybe like a monolith that heals you that doesn't really anything else. But I think considering her buff, I'll put her in A. She'll get a little bit more valuable because her ultimate is so strong in team fights. If you can get to that stage without being really far behind on Terra, then your ult will definitely pop off in fights. So I'd say A.
Yeah, I think she's one of those characters that you can just kind of default pick if you want, but if you also get the opportunity to pick her into comps that you like feel good into, then you're just going to be super impactful in my opinion.
Yeah.
Getting a buff like you said, so that's pretty good. And she's got probably one of the better ultimates in the game. So if you can get to team fights with that character and you can get your ult on backliners, you'll be feeling pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Thanatos. Probably A.
Thanatos is up next. B tier, in my opinion. Counter pick for sure. Can execute frontliners like Cthulhu and stuff, which is kind of cool, but he is very, very reliant on being a good Thanatos and hitting your ones. If you don't hit your ones, then you're not going to do great. And is also pretty easy to go on. Like, a lot of characters can kind of just, like, especially in the jungle, a lot of these characters can kind of 1v1 him really hard because he has to ult to get away. So, kind of just pretty easy to dive and, like, get on and maybe force his actives or his ult or anything like that.
Yeah, I think Thanatos is pretty easy to kill, like you said. Like, if you get on a Thanatos before he can kind of do all this damage to you, you will feel great. And I think his ganks are pretty easy to, like, foresee. Like, the second he wants to go into that jungle, you're probably just going to expect to get ulted, so you kind of just play back. And if that guy's not getting consistent kills and whatnot, then he's not going to feel too great. I think his biggest perk is then he can execute frontliners in a meta where, like, frontliners are a pretty big deal in team fights. So if you're doing that, you're drafting him for that, and you're actually executing the strat well, then he's good in that sense. But besides that, he's an alright character.
Morgan, I think, is A+. Not quite S tier in my opinion. Very good in ranked, especially in mid. Well, that's pretty much her only viable role, to be honest. She can be played in ADC. She was played there last year, but most of the time she's going to be in mid. And it's very good in ranked because she's kind of a cheese character in my opinion. Can one-shot people late game, can kind of have a pretty good early game because her clear is really good, and kind of clear and rotate and make some good transformations and get a lot of value, but just not quite S tier because she does have some downsides. Like, she's very bad at killing frontliners, so it's really easy to play around her as a frontliner, and her invis is a really bad ability into stuff like Air and Diet, Crusher, into characters that have AoE abilities and that can dive her really hard. So the biggest benefit from her probably is that she doesn't get owned by thorns. She can kind of dive on her own.
Yeah, I think Morgan's just really good at a couple things. Flanking was the primary thing that she was good at before, right? Where you can get like really nice flanks and team fights around like fire giants and whatnot. You can go through like the lower side of mid or like the higher side of their jungle and get to the back camps and whatnot. But as we spoke about probably like 2 hours ago when this thing started, that Erendite kind of ruined Invis characters, because a lot of the times, like if a jungler ult in and you're behind and you haven't gotten your damage off yet, and then you get revealed by the Erendite passive, you're kind of just like, oh, here I am. On top of that, you can't really forego the fact that she's still probably like the buggiest character in the game, and there's just some random chance where you're going to want to transform into God A, and you're randomly going to transform into God like B, C, D, whoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's all right. I think she's got some really good strengths. For instance, like in the 1v1, you're basically fighting 2 characters because she can ult into somebody after using her first kill on you.
Yeah.
And that's nice. It makes her a little bit hard to deal with, especially if it played Morgan at EC and things like that. I guess her being a pseudo flex in some gods or some cases, and some teams can do it or some players can do it. That's something to think about. But I don't know. She's probably A+. If you play her the way she's meant to be played and execute different like strategies with your team, then she's a great character. She's also extremely versatile with what you can transform into.
Yeah,
like you can be a super ham Morrigan and transform into like an assassin, or we've seen a lot of Morrigans. Like I remember her when you go in, you blow up somebody, and then you transform immediately into a tank, and get the tank skill off, and that's like
no, Herwin's never done that. He doesn't know how to play that character.
Paul.
Yeah.
Never mind. So yeah, versatility, and she's also great to Thorns. So yeah.
Yeah. Thor, probably A+. Still one of the better junglers in the game. Very good at snowballing the map and kind of just dictating the pace of the game with his ganks, and his late game is still very, very strong with his ultimate. Ever since they made his ult do lightning damage and have like Heartseeker and stuff in the game, he kind of just one shots people come late game. But yeah, I would say still one of the better junglers in the game. Just around A+. Isn't quite game breaking like these S tier characters or S+, but still very strong.
Yeah, I think
he can also be a flex pick as well. So
yeah, that's definitely a big thing. I think Thor is pretty oppressive into the right comps, where that ultimate and even the wall can be so insane.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think if you're landing all your abilities and you're landing your Thor dunks consistently around, you're getting double taps off in team fights, you're just going to be doing 1 million damage and you're going to feel great. So yeah, I think he's A+. You can kind of just pick him default, like, hey, I'm jungling, just grab me Thor, and you'll probably just do all right / well. So I think that's a big thing.
Exactly. Why he's better than the AT characters as well. You can just pick him in every game. Thoth, I would probably say is A tier as well. Even though he's more of a counter pick, just because he gets dove really, really hard. No CC immunity, very easy to play around as a frontliner. Can just run at him and kill him. I think that his payoff is stronger in those scenarios where he gets a good counter pick or gets a good matchup than a lot of these B tier characters, and is actually okay into Thorns because you always have the choice to use your abilities into it. There's never like maybe you accidentally hit somebody with Thorns with your ultimate, but that's really all there is to it. You can kind of decide to use your 1 or your 2 into Thorns, and also can always hit carries because he has such long range. So you can kind of try and ignore frontliners. Is very bad at killing frontliners though, so obvious downside to him. But A tier just because pretty good with the items right now as well, like Spear of the Magus, Applying Divine, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think if you're picking Thoth into bad divers, you're gonna feel great. But if you like blind pick Thoth early and you get kind of counter picked and you are facing really good dives, and you're gonna have a hard time. But I think he's just a good god. He offers a lot to a team. He offers a lot of poke. Obviously, his ult's kind of game changing. He's also not like terrible into Thorns, and I'm probably going to say that about every character that isn't good. For the characters that are good.
Yeah, once again, Thorns. Well, not Thorns, but maybe just actives in general are kind of dictating a lot of the meta. With Shell, with Thorns, with Blink, Blink even as well. So yeah.
He's an overall pretty solid pick. You could probably pick him most games, especially in rank, because you're not going to get like coordinated doved, whatever the
Duck
terminology.
dive, duck dodge, dip.
Yeah, duck.
Uh,
But yeah, he's just a pretty good character.
yeah, Tsukiyomi, I think A plus. Don't think he's as broken as he was before. Kind of nerfed him a little bit, and does get. I wouldn't say owned by Aegis, but I think Aegis is pretty good against him. You just have to time that well, and it's a little bit easier to play around his dive. But still very, very good. His ultimate does a ton of damage. His 2 is, like we said before, is basically just Bologna's entire kit and one ability. Can be very annoying if he's just running at you. If he's constantly W keying at you, then he's going to get a ton of value like most characters would, but even him more so because of like how his 1 works and getting the CC reduction and just, getting a ton of value with his range poke and all that. But does get less valuable when you're actually going on him because he's pretty easy to dive and kill because he doesn't really have a true escape. And if he accidentally ults in when he's low and like is accidentally hit somebody with it, then he's just going to TP in and die. So yeah, very, very valuable from ahead for sure.
Yeah, I think what's also pretty nice about Tsukuyomi is that you can kind of go Beads Aegis on him instead of Blink. You don't really need Blink, so you become a little bit safer than most junglers. And that also means that if you're forcing the jungler into going Beads Aegis themselves, it obviously takes a big part away from most of their kits. Yeah. And if they're not going Beads Aegis, then you have a really, 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 really good 1v1 into most of them, right? So
yeah.
That's pretty valuable. I think his snowball's insane. He obviously can destroy carries super easily with just his entire kit being super hard to avoid. And I think he's just an overall pretty good character. Nothing like too insane. But I think he's probably A plus. He was probably S before all of his nerfs, but now that he's toned down a little bit, people know how to play against him. It's not just like, dude, this is literally Arthur 2.0 just hitting me with a bunch of abilities. Then it's just easier to play against him. Yeah, probably a plus.
Tier up next, and everybody needs to shed a tear for Tier because I think this character is horrible. I would probably put him in C, maybe B, just because he's not gonna lose you the game ever for the most part, just because he's hard to kill and he's hard to like win a lane against, just because he has so much healing and you just sit there and blue stance in lane and never do anything. But for the most part, I would just say he doesn't really do anything besides maybe force some beat sometimes and not die. But I just think the character is like B, maybe C.
Yeah, I think
maybe valuable as a flex, but that's it.
I think Tier was really good when that movement speed meta was made by Solo, but after they nerfed all the movement speed items, they kind of nerfed Tier as well again. So yeah, I don't think he's useful. I don't think he dives well. I don't think he really does anything in particular that's like super threatening. So probably just
late game doesn't have enough damage to actually even kill anybody. Kind of just does like half of somebody's health and that's it. Maybe with thorns, but then people will just interrupt your fearless because you don't have CC immunity, and it's like, okay, well now I'm pretty useless. Uller kind of, I mean, good flex because he can still ball in mid matchups. He's pretty decent in duo as well, always just because he has a lot of early kill potential, which is very, very good in ranked. But no CC immunity is definitely a downside to him. Doesn't get as owned by thorns as some other ADCs just because he can go a different build path where he goes full CDR and kind of jumps away from people, CCs them to get away, movement speeds to get away and stuff like that. But no CC immunity is definitely rough for him. Can kind of get killed a lot of the time. And I think probably even has a bad matchup into Cupid, which is pretty rough considering, Cupid's probably just more valuable when it comes to late game. So just A tier because he can always have that opportunity to snowball.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is that his build path is just kind of hard stuck going trans. Mm-hmm. And that kind of means you're just going to get either late cans or no lifesteal or, just a couple different things that the meta is not very forgiving. So, yep. I don't know. I think he was good before the big, after the MSI changes. He was pretty good before MSI or at MSI, and then the meta kind of just evolved into Cupid Rama, auto attack hunters, devs build, and early obos and whatnot. And I don't think Uller has that luxury. So, yeah, okay. That's why he's pretty bad.
Vamana, I would say A. Downside obviously gets owned by upgraded Curse Sunk and will get one shot late game. His ultimate is pretty bad late game when people have a lot of anti-heal and upgraded Curse Sunk. But pretty safe and early to mid. Very hard to kill when people don't have anti-heal. And you can proxy a lot and get loose and kind of rotate and do a lot of stuff coming from solo lane. And maybe he's viable in jungle. Maybe people need to mess around with that, especially after his buffs to his ultimate. They keep buffing his ultimate. They need to buff other parts of his kit because his first 3 abilities don't really do all that much and aren't that great. They're kind of just okay, and but they keep buffing his ultimate, and I don't know. I think the character is A just because he is very good at not dying and still pretty good at diving with Blink and Thorns. Just keep in mind that late game you won't be able to just like solo people on cooldown like you would in the mid game. So
yeah, I think there was a time where Vamana kind of was really good, and then he got nerfed, right? He got nerfed before his buff right now.
yeah.
I think anti-heal just obviously farms the character, so you like go up into your ult, and then you'll get hit by like 2 or 3 sources of anti-heal, and you'll be like, wait a second, I'm not healing anymore. And then you either commit to diving and doing damage, or you kind of just get hyper farmed, like super farmed by their backliners. So I don't think he's that good at diving anymore. He is a good diver, but he's not hard to live against in the dive, so I don't know. He's just like an okay character. If you are good at him and you are into like a good comp that can do a lot of anti-heal, you can obviously hard carry, but besides that, I don't really see him being too valuable.
Yeah, not any better than these other characters above him. Especially if you want to play a character that has long CC immunity and dies really well, just play Cthulhu, and you'll be a lot better than a Vamana. Vulcan. Maswald's going to kill me for this, but I would say Vulcan's probably B. Maybe. He is getting buffed next patch, which is a really silly buff, and we keep mentioning Thorns, but it's just a big deal. If he's getting buffed where his ultimate does more damage the up close, which means that he's just going to do more damage to himself because whenever you ult on top of yourself, it's because people are diving you, and the people that are diving you have Thorns. So in turn, you're just going to reflect more damage to yourself. So kind of troll aspect to it. It's obviously a little bit more valuable in scenarios where people don't have Thorns, or maybe, only one of them has it, so you do a little bit more damage. But, for the most part, the character's not all that great, and is good with the Do More build, but, basically ultimate isn't very good, and I don't know, just no real reason to pick him over other characters. Very easy to dive as well.
Yeah, I think what made Vulcan semi-valuable before, if he ever was like really valuable, is that since he has no escape, he has a lot of like self-peel in the forms of like his 3 and his ult, like dropping his ult on himself. But now if you're a diver, you can kind of just reflect all of that back to him, which makes him even less safe, and he's already not that safe of a character. So you're just gonna feel not great playing him. On top of that, his abilities aren't really the easiest to hit. Like his ult, it's not really that easy of an ability to hit. And yeah, he kind of just gets dove really easily and just doesn't really do much. It's not just damage. So I'd say B. B is a good spot.
X ball probably B. I don't really know. I don't have too much of an opinion on him. I don't really know why he's not played too much in ADC because the character is still decent in the late game just because he does a lot of damage and his ult is a little bit valuable in team fights. But I guess he's pretty hard for him to live against Thorns because, kind of just sits there and auto attacks, and if he dashes away, people can chase him because it's really not that far of a dash. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe where would you put him?
I think he's B, and I only think it's because he's also hard stuck on that trans build path.
Oh yeah, that's true.
They did buff him at one point, and it was like a random buff that came out of nowhere, and I thought it was good. And then they nerfed that exact buff like the patch after that, and it was the most random
maybe in mid
thing ever. But I think characters that just don't have the correct build path this meta are just not going to be like picked unless it's like niche reasons like Uller, for instance. If you want to like hard pressure game and try to win really early, and you're like, oh, just give me Uller because he's really good at fighting, sure. But for X-Ball, that same logic doesn't really ever apply. You're not like, oh, we need to do this, so give me X-Ball. Because X-Ball is already a late game character, so you're not like picking him for anything besides like mid-late game. Yeah. So I don't think he's very viable, and I think he's also bad to Thorns, like you said, and has a bad build path, so he's just a bad god.
Xing Tian up next. A tier. Still, I mean, he's not as valuable as he once was, but still good in support and in solo. I'd say he's better in support, but can be played solo, It's actually kind of troll because another thing with like Thorns and interaction with Xing Tian is that Thorns is a little bit of a non-bow on Jing Tian because whenever you one somebody, they're doing less damage, so they're actually doing less damage to themselves. So if you one somebody and then Thorns, kind of a bad combo. Obviously, you can try and like wait it out or change it, but usually that just means like characters don't really have that great of a combo with the actives that they're going. But still very good. Punishes a lot of characters with no CC immunity and is very, very hard to kill just because he has his dashes. He has his CC immunity and his ultimate. He has a lot of HP 5. Obviously, Guardian base stats are really strong for him. So I would just say he's A tier. Can kind of just be played in every scenario and feel okay, but maybe not as valuable as some other characters.
Yeah, I'd say the fact that he's a flex is also a big reason as to why he's a little bit higher in the tier list. And he's kind of just a big anti-ADC Guardian that is just like pretty good. And is a big beads forcer as well. So if you pick him into the right things, you will have a field day. But if you're kind of just blind picking him, you'll probably do all right, but wouldn't be like too crazy impactful. So I'd say A.
Yemoja is interesting because in the right hands, I think the character is definitely S+. Does way too much. Literally can hard carry games from support, which just says a lot. And just, kind of just ridiculous in my opinion. I play a lot of Yemoja. I love the character. But the problem with Yemoja, and considering this is talking about all of ranked, is there's a lot of players, a lot of support players that one, either don't want to play her, I guess, for whatever reason, or two, just aren't very good at the character. I think she does have a high skill cap, so it's hard to be absolutely perfect with her. But she's still S tier, in my opinion, at least. Maybe, I don't know what you say, Max, but you can almost always get value out of her ultimate, as long as you're just like blocking somebody off. You always get value out of that. And you always get value out of her ones in the early to mid game with just like chain lock or chain stunning somebody or anything like that. So I don't know what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you're a good Yemoja, I think what speaks for the character the most is that even if you're a decent Yemoja, you are still so impactful, right? So if you're a good Yemoja, you are like extremely hard to deal with and can do a million different things extremely well.
I'm putting her in S+.
I think in the right hands she's S+, and even in the wrong hands she's probably S. So
yeah,
that statement in itself probably just does bump her up to S+ though.
Yeah, if you don't think this character is S+, just go learn how to play her, and there you go. Just do it. All right, moving on. Almost finished here. Ymir, the Frost Giant. I would say A, maybe A+, because his early pressure and duo is really good. Can get a lot of value out of his wall, kind of like Kabrakan. There's a lot of characters right now that can't really get over his wall. I mean, you just look at some of these characters in S tier. He instantly can wall them off, which is pretty good. But he still has the problem where he's kind of slow, not movement speed wise, but his like animations are kind of slow. He kind of has to sit in place to use his ult or his 3 or his 2. Kind of roots himself, so kind of easy to kill for that reason. But I would say that his payoff because of his wall and his early pressure is there that puts him in A+. I think, but I don't know about what do you think?
Yeah, I think Ymir kind of came out of nowhere as well. I like this character that's just like pretty good. I think a lot of it does have to do with him just gaining like kind of crush pressure in duo and just being really hard to deal with, especially since they buffed his passive and Guardians are going tank boots now. When that character comes back to your lane at level like 5 or 4 with full boots and you're just a like Devs 1 ADC, he is actually impossible to deal with.
That is true.
And I think he's just a really good character in general. He's got a lot to offer to a team. And yeah, I think you'd probably high pick him if you're comfortable in the character and are good at using his kit. Then I think for sure you can pick him pretty consistently and just be like, all right, cool. I'm Ymir. I can do work this game.
Yeah. It is a good point that he is a counter pick, but he's also in the counter picks, he's really, really good. And even in the scenarios where you're not counter picking him, I still think he gets some value because his early pressure is really good in duo. And, the buffs to his passive and stuff and the buffs to tank boots actually kind of make him a little bit harder to kill than he once was. Speaking of hard to kill, or maybe the opposite, Zeus is definitely the opposite of hard to kill. That character is horrible. This character is D tier. All he offers is damage, and the worst part about his damage is that all of it is thornsable. Quite easily, by the way, because if you throw your 2 out and then 1 off of it, a person can easily react to it because it's very slow. If you throw out your ultimate, they can just sit in it with thorns and you'll die. none of your damage can be used over walls besides your ultimate, which I don't know if you're ulting over a wall and then 3ing, maybe, but that's never going to happen for the most part. And has absolutely no CC besides slows. Very easy to dive. It's hard for him to get away because he has no escape. The character's D tier. Very bad in Conquest. In everything else, he's maybe fine, but...
Yeah. I agree with everything said. For the most part. I don't know. I don't really know what they need to give to Zeus to like make him better. Maybe some form of self-defense or self-peel or something like that, but I don't know. That character's pretty much just useless. Like, I don't know why you're ever picking Zeus if other characters are available. I'd probably rather pick like 80% of the other mages than Zeus. And I think you do well.
Yep.
So, yeah, probably one of the worst characters in the game.
Yep, Zhong Kui, I would say, is B. Probably slightly underrated in solo, honestly, right now. And he could be played in mid, but I would say for the most part throughout the years, his most viable role has been solo. Maybe ADC last year when it was kind of busted with the build path and everything. But, you know, he's more of a solo pick. And in the solo lane, even when he is underrated, in my opinion, sometimes he's a counter pick at the end of the day. You don't want to pick him into hard lane bullies, and you don't want to pick him in scenarios where there's a nemesis on the enemy team. You'll get owned for that. When there's auto attackers on the enemy team, he gets owned by auto attackers, like auto attack junglers and stuff like that. So yeah, I would just say B tier, maybe good in some scenarios as a counter pick, but for the most part, still just kind of lackluster right now.
Yeah, I think what's pretty interesting, Horus seems to do this a lot, where they'll overbuff a character and then nerf him, and then they just like slowly start rebuffing him again. And we're seeing that with Zhong Kui right now. Like he's getting a couple buffs, or I think he's gotten like a buff the past like 3 patches or something like that, where eventually they're just gonna overbuff the character and he's gonna return to the state that he was at one point in time. I don't know if that necessarily will matter, like because it's pretty meta dependent as well, but. I don't know. I think he's just an okay character if you can pick him in some scenarios, but even then, most scenarios you're picking him and you're probably just getting countered by something. So, he's just like a very character, in my opinion.
Since we're done, just as a general rule of thumb, like what happens a lot with gods is that they'll be buffed a lot in like those small ways, like you're talking about. They'll be buffed throughout the years in small ways, 1 or 2, 3, 4 maybe buffs, and then what happens is the meta shifts in it a little bit based on like items or just about like what top gods are being played, and then they get more value. And usually what happens is they buff one specific part of a character's kit that has always been bad. For example, this happened with Amma. Amma wasn't really being played at all, and then all of a sudden they hard buffed her too to make it really good early game. So then they did the same with Afro before. They buffed her 3 and made her early game clear really well, or really good. And then it makes the character's only downside non-existent. So now they're good at all points of the game and they become a really, really good character. A similar thing happened with Set, where he wasn't really played that much. He was always like a decent picked and ranked and stuff like that, because people were talking about it earlier in my chat. They were like, what the heck? Why is Set all of a sudden really, really good? Set is actually a lot more viable now because of the meta, because there's a lot of thorns. People are diving the backline with thorns. So if you play him in mid or in ADC, you can actually just avoid the dive and dive yourself and go on their backliners, and you just get so much more value than you would have before if you did that, because you're avoiding all the thorns, which is kind of dictating a lot of the meta. So it's not just the fact that, oh, people didn't realize Set was OP. It's like, no, the meta shifts based on like how the game is being played, the things that are really OP, and how, I say a lot of the time how they buff characters. They make these small buffs, here and there, and then all of a sudden they buff the only bad part of a kit, and then boom, it becomes a really OP character, because all of these other small buffs that they had before add up to make that one strong buff just absolutely ridiculous, So it happens a lot with characters, and it doesn't. People are always like, "Oh, this character came out of nowhere," but everything adds up, man. And if you just buff a character to make it so they don't have any bad point of the game, then they're going to be valuable the entire time. So no reason not to pick them. But that's how I see it. That's how our tier list sees it as well. I don't know if. I'm sure some people disagree. I saw a lot of people in chat saying stuff like, oh, this character is 1 tier below the other character, lol, and stuff like that. Like, come on, guys. Everybody has their own opinion. Max and I have a much different opinion than a bronze player would, which is probably what most of you are in the chat. But, no, I'm just kidding. No, but if you disagree 1 tier with our tier list, that's like silly. It's not a big deal. Like, a tier list is just a general rule of thumb for what is meta, and like our explanations for it, and like kind of what's going on with the meta in SPL, in ranked, and stuff like that. And whatever you should take from a tier list for the most part is A+ and S tier and S+ tier. Look at these characters, play these characters in ranked, and you'll do really well. You'll win games. You'll win more ranked games because you picked them. And that's really all there is to it. If you think Bastet it shouldn't be C tier, she should be A tier because of this, that, and the other reason, then yeah, good for you, man. That's not the point of the video. Anyway, yeah. What do you have anything to say, Max? Twitch.tv/pandacat, Twitch or Twitter.com/mpandacat, and you're also on YouTube at Pandacat, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't even know what my YouTube like thing is, because like I think if you type in youtube.com/pandacat, it's another account. I mean, you can just type Pandacat into YouTube.
Yeah, if you just type in Smite Pandacat on YouTube, you'll find a bunch of ADC videos to learn from. And yeah, that's all there really is to it.
I think the only thing to add is just like Alex said, just take everything with a grain of salt. Like everyone's at a different skill level, and you kind of have to take into consideration that. Like I have a lot of people always coming by and asking me why I think Izanami is the worst character in the game, and how everybody that plays against Izanami in their ranked games gets absolutely farmed by and whatnot. And those things are going to happen, and you kind of just have to do like your own critical thinking and think like, maybe this character's only doing well because the people that I'm playing with don't know how to play against it, or maybe she is broken, things like that. But don't just look at the tier list and be like, well, I used to love Daji and Alec put her in B tier. So I'm not.
And now I hate him.
And I hate her now.
Yeah. If you're still owning with Daji in your ranked games, people aren't building shell, you feel comfortable on the character, you know what to do in every scenario, then keep doing you, man. As long as you're doing well, who cares? And that's also why, last but not least, that's why I like making these videos longer and talking about every single character, because no matter what, you can learn something from every explanation that we give. And maybe Daji is maybe A tier in your opinion, but something that we told you about Daji changed your opinion just a little bit, made you feel a little bit better about this scenario or that scenario. It's just about the information that we give during the tier list, I think, is really important. And I think that's like kind of the whole point of this video, because at the end of the day, if you just made like a 30-minute tier list and you put a character in each tier and said, play this for no reason, you just put it there and we're like, yep, that's why it's there, then you're not really going to learn anything from it. And then you're kind of just following like an authority that you don't really need to. So hopefully at the end of the day, you at least learn something from the information, so.
Yeah.
That's it for us. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. And yeah, that's it. Say bye, Max.
Bye, Max.
Oh my